Sorry.
It's Wednesday.
We love each other.
Yeah.
Weirdly appropriate for today's topic.
It really
Weirdly
is.
appropriate.
It's a little on the nose. I like it.
No, this would have been a little on the nose.
Aw.
No, that's actually
I got internet booped. I know. I'm going right back
Web
to my
boop.
Overwatch. Web boop.
Webboop, www.boop.gov.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
.gov?
.org.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why is it .gov?
Because the government's and everything.
No.
We're
Boom!
Thank you. We're talking about manga today. We're still
Can we get a full table shot so I can do the dramatic?
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Bring us camera 2.
What?
We brought some stuff, y'all.
We brought so much stuff. We needed a guest.
If my wife is watching, I borrowed one of your Berserk. Actually,
didn't
I
tell her
borrowed 2.
before you
Also,
left?
I borrowed Domu. But I'll bring them all home safely. I promise.
Finding internet promises. Speaking of that guest,
Yes, hello, that's me. I'm the guest.
Let's go down. Hi everybody. I'm Taliesin Jaffe, as Executive God.
I like Jaffney.
Jaffney.
Jaffney works.
And I'm here running table for the day. And to my left.
Hi, I'm Emma Fyffe, and I'm Emma Fyffe all over the internet. I like to keep things, very simple.
thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
Yay,
thanks for
Emma
having me,
Fyffe.
guys. I'm excited to be here and just really delve into all of this colorful gloriousness that's really just colorful on the outside. We'll get into that.
Color's a lie.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Matt Keane.
Hi, I'm Baby Dallen.
And you
I
see
didn't know
us
there
here
was
on
more coming
Wednesdays.
in that sentence, and I couldn't
No,
talk.
there's no.
Yeah,
there's
no,
not.
nothing. Just have to have. And we are discussing manga today, and this is still early days for the show, which means that we're kind of still covering the big topics
Yeah.
before we go into minutia.
Sure.
So it's interesting to be basically covering an entire country's worth of comic books.
Yeah, you know how every week we're like, there's no way this could possibly fit into 2 hours, and then we try? We're just going to own out front that this is impossible.
Yeah.
This is an entire, universe of art that we're talking about.
Because in Japan, it's like you have to to put things in perspective, it's like comics obviously are a big phenomenon in Western culture, and lots of people read comic books, but not everybody reads comic books. In Japan, literally everybody reads manga. So manga covers so many different topics, and it's like you have stuff about superheroes, you have stuff about people who bake bread, you know what I mean? It's the whole gamut, because again, the Japanese language itself is so difficult that as you're growing up, you literally need pictures in order to read anything.
I genuinely don't know why I invited you on this. That I had never thought of it that way.
Yeah,
actually. That's
I
fascinating.
remember my dad went on a business trip to Japan when I was really young, probably 95-ish, which was when I started watching Sailor Moon in syndication on UPN really, really early in the morning, and that was when my sort of fascination with Japanese culture began. Even before that, because I loved Voltron and Speed Racer. But I remember my dad being everyone in Japan on the subway is reading one of these bad
I
boys.
can actually. Would you like my Japanese subway simulator?
I would, absolutely.
They're not wrong, by the way. They're not wrong.
I will say,
2
don't
years
be
on that
intimidated
green
by
line.
the language. If you've ever wanted to tackle Japanese, it obviously is quite different from English, but it's
Yes.
not as hard as people make it out to be.
I completely agree.
But it is true that it makes sense that they would have grown up beautifully in Japan because visual cultures, the narrative and visual cultures have been linked for a long time over there, which I think Tal's going to get into.
Well, I will also because, and this is something interesting before we go anywhere. There's an interesting facet of manga that really surprises me, and it's something that as a kid, before comic books, anime and manga were my first nerddoms. That was the first thing, and that was 1990. That was a long time ago, and trying to bring these books around to my friends and to my parents, even kids who were my same age, I would show them anime, and their first response was, "When do they start singing?" This is weird. It looks like a cartoon, but no one's singing.
But it's not a cartoon.
What's up with that? I
that
thought
does
this
make
was
sense.
a cartoon. And the comic books are I can't make heads or tails of this. There's no flow through. Even friends who wrote,
you're going from the left to the right, not the right to the
Back
left.
then,
So
they would
it's
flip everything.
Yes.
well, this was even before I was buying books before they started translating them. It was just straight Japanese because I was that intense. But one of the interesting things I find about manga is that pop culture pop culture is really fascinating. Is every country has a pop culture. Pop cultures are basically the notion of what people are excited about that they're making right now. Pop culture is great, and there's really only one country that exports all of its pop culture to the rest of the world, and that's the United States. We are a weird little aberration where we, for some strange reason, make this most sugary, saccharine pop culture that just, it's a flavor that is addictive and overriding and really, really hard to get out of your system.
Oh, we left American GIs all over the world post-World War II.
That also Japan is one of the only other countries that exports its pop culture to us en masse, or there's influence of Japanese pop culture in our films, in our books, in our comic books, everywhere. And there's been this really interesting back and forth reflection between the two pop cultures that had never really, nothing like it has ever really existed. And it's so fascinating to see how Western pop culture influences Japanese pop culture, which in turn influences Western pop culture. And it's this crazy conversation that we've been having.
It's one of the most interesting sort of, like pop cultural exchanges of the 20th century would be sort of the back and forth there.
Yeah.
And this is really one of the only big ones. Like this is the big one, is Japan and the United States. I mean, we make movies that the world sees.
We take a lot of British television.
We enjoy it, but honestly, if British television wasn't in English, we wouldn't be watching it because we're lazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I agree with you because, and I agree, I know what you're saying, Amy, about like, yes, we take a lot of British television and America makes versions of British TV shows, but I think there is something in the phenomenon of like Japan exporting its stuff, and particularly in Western culture, a lot of sort of the storytelling and stuff is so different.
It's rare that we make room for something like
yes,
that.
Yes, exactly.
They use a different act structure than we do. They were not raised on the 3-act structure. They have a different set of goals within their fiction. There's a fundamental, and I'm going to make some broad generalizations here.
Put asterisks all over this episode.
There are broad generalizations here, as it is talking about anything so big. But one of the big things, and this was something that bothered me as a kid a lot about Japanese comic books and Japanese storytelling in general, was that I never felt that I'm a fan of the 3-act structure. I like there to be a group of people and then a conflict and then a resolution. These things excite me. I love like status quo, break the status quo, resolve the status quo. This makes sense to me. Most Japanese stories don't do that. They're not interested in it. They think it's cool. But you get to the end of a lot of these books, and you're like, what happened?
Yes, I totally agree with you. Even like really long series will end, and you're like, wait, were all the events in that story a dream? Like, did that really happen? I'm so confused.
The idea of resolution works
Yeah.
out quite a bit.
So what, do they have an idea of resolution? Like again, this is like very general, like overgeneralization, but like, do they have an idea? Like, does Japanese culture have an idea of narrative resolution?
They do. It's
Is
a
it
different
different
goal.
from ours?
It is different
Okay.
from ours, which is really, and I had this explained to me by a Buddhist monk of all things, where I was like, explain this to me. Why does, and I was like, ask me a question. I was like, why does manga end weird? This was.
Where was this Buddhist monk?
I want to say probably outside Roppongi after.
Okay, all right.
Why does manga end weird? And as
did you ask him straight up, why does manga end weird?
Probably. I was like 19. This is probably exactly how I said it.
I can't imagine going to like a Franciscan monk from like our particular Western culture and saying, why do comic books end weird? The Franciscan monk would be like, I read scripture.
This guy had already been laughing at me for like 30 minutes. I
Okay.
figured just like, let's just keep it rolling.
Just go full tilt.
I'm hungover and tired.
Were you in Japan at the time?
I was. I was outside my least favorite part of Tokyo in Roppongi. I'd had yet again a terrible night in Roppongi. Roppongi is one of those places you just shouldn't go to.
Yeah, it's like the party town of Tokyo.
Yeah,
but
it's like a sleazy Bel Air.
Yeah.
It's awful. But
Where is that on the green
I
line?
didn't make sense to me when I was there.
Because when we were there for our honeymoon, like that was kind of where we stayed. Was just on.
oh
the,
no, it's
the
where
green line.
it's a good place for Westerners to stay because it's but yeah, like all the good stuff's outside of. And did you end up at Gas Panic?
No.
Oh, thank God. Okay, good.
No.
There's rules. It's a terrible club. I'm so sorry to be bashing a nightclub in Japan right now on the internet.
Someone's probably watching our show and that
tweeting.
club
There's
right
a
now.
there's a
like,
there's a
"How
bartender
dare you!"
going, "How dare you?"
We're coming for you.
So, specifically, I brought this up because Gundam was bothering me, and I felt like Gundam didn't have a really good ending, and I didn't understand it, and I was confused. And the interesting thing that this guy said, because he was he was illiterate and an interesting guy, he said Gundam the stories that we're telling, things don't end. We're not really the culture is not really that concerned with the notion of ending things. There's no resolution to things. Resolution is a myth.
Nothing ends,
Yeah.
Adrian. Nothing ever ends.
So if you just take that as not being profound, but as like a basic way of life, why tell a story that has an ending if endings don't exist? And instead, their stories, they abandon the story. The feeling is you abandon the story once you have a notion of who this character is and why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's all about finding out who these people are. And that's usually when the story ends, is when you're like, I get them now. Which is why when they come back to do sequels, oftentimes they'll start a reboot from scratch and change everybody's intention.
Yeah.
Because now there's new things to learn, whereas there was nothing new to learn anymore. We know who Spike is.
so
It's
interesting.
interesting to combine that notion, the idea that like the story doesn't need a resolution in the sense that we think of it, with the fact that the other, like a big hallmark of sort of Japanese literature, from my limited experience, is like a much greater sort of acceptance of mortality. So individual stories for sure have endings.
Yeah.
Like that's not a thing that is like new information. But like the story overall and the idea of the ending might be different.
Yeah.
It's one of those interesting, especially Gundam is a great example of this. If you're ever watching the anime Gundam, is that any moment that a character starts
The
to
original
have
series,
the
or just
original.
literally any of them?
I won't talk to like W or the pretty ones.
Sure,
but,
sure.
But like the original
This
Gundam.
is a series that has been rebooted and remade many, many times.
Yeah, and there's many different series, and some of them have to do with each other, and some of them only sort of do because there are Gundams in them. And
It's the Star Wars of Japan that's been going on since the 70s.
Yeah.
Except it's not like in Star Wars we assume that things belong in the same
Right.
coherent universe,
Sure.
and if they don't, we're confused about it.
And
But they
like,
they change universes all the time.
And also with Star Wars, like, yes, there is a political struggle within Star Wars, but it's not necessarily, there's this bigger struggle of good and evil, whereas, like, Gundam is very political.
It's very gray. It's very, very
Yes,
murky and
there's
gray.
no good and evil in
There it is.
Gundam.
So it sounds like, in a way, like kind of boil it down, like Japanese storytelling has like much more complexity to it than
It's a portrait.
Yeah.
They're big on portraits. And
that's one of the things that like I love from understanding comics. When we revisited that last week, McLeod told the difference between like here's Japanese manga, here's American Western. American Western or Western culture is beginning, middle, end, like you said. Let's get from point A to point B as fast as we can. Here's the action fun.
Yeah.
Whereas manga is like, hey, here's this character. Here's some bread that's on his counter, and here's his refrigerator. There's flies outside of his window. Like they paint a portrait on the page.
what was really intriguing about that, revisiting that passage in Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics that we were talking about for our 101 episode last week, is that he breaks down features, facets of storytelling, and in that part, I think it's specifically about panel transitions and the kind of like using them to paint a scene rather than move action forward. And what's interesting is that he finds like he checks a bunch of different major classics in like the European canon and in the American canon, and he finds sort of this consistency. But he's writing in the early 90s. So what was fascinating to me about revisiting that distinction, because then he turns his eye on a lot of manga and he finds these different types of transitions. In the years since 1990, that conversation that Taliesin was talking about has influenced...
completely muddled it now.
Yeah, American comics are very different because we've started to adopt some of these features and techniques because of probably the 80s wave of reprints would have been where it started, and then the 90s, like real pop cultural...
The 90s were
like,
the beginning
entry
of the American explosion.
Yeah. But you get like the 80s, like the late 80s.
What do you
want
wanna
to
find?
Dark Horse. I want to find Lone Wolf.
Oh,
Lone Wolf's right
Yeah.
here.
Because it's sort of like, this sort of like
Oh, that
Dark Horse.
brick.
And I think specifically he gets credit for this. Frank Miller, I think, was a big proponent in the early days. Like he wrote introductions to translations of stuff that had never been presented in English before in like the late 80s, early 90s, and was sort of saying like, look at everything we can learn from a bunch of these things that have not made their way into English yet. Okay,
So-
we're jumping.
But it was interesting, bringing up the idea of sort of the visual storytelling of manga, and now the trend in terms of translating manga into anime, which wasn't always the case
No,
in
it
the
was
early
not.
days. So like with manga in the early days, most anime that's based off of manga sort of mid 90s, late 90s, I would even say, is sort of like an interpretation of the manga. And it wasn't until somewhat more recently that we started to get these more direct translations of page to screen. And Amy, as you were saying about kind of like the visual transitions in manga, they don't necessarily always translate super great to the screen.
Oh no.
Like, because so much of manga that you're reading with the visual storytelling is like your brain filling in the gaps of what happened between this frame and this frame. And when you try to go page to screen, it goes,
Atmospheric effect
yeah.
it has to be created in a different way.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
We didn't really cover it yesterday, but panel pacing is a big thing. Is the amount of time that in theory exists between one panel and the next, like what happens between them. The amount of space between panels in manga there tends to be a lot of space or all happening at once in a long silence.
And when you say space, you don't mean like the actual line between the
Chronological.
frames. You
Yeah.
mean this happens, and then the event that's happening in this particular frame is a certain distance from what happened in this frame.
Yeah, that's
allowing
Not
the
physical
audience to
distance, story distance, time
Tempo.
distance.
difference,
yeah,
sorry.
tempo.
But
Tempo's a good word.
Tempo.
The gutter between the frames has a longer width of time between each of the two frames, and that allows the audience to fill in that much more of the information on their own.
It's almost a sketchier story, like the nuances of these moments are captured when it's time. But there are pages that are 20 minutes on occasion, where it's like 20 minutes of story time. There's no dialogue. There's just nothing happening, but in a very profound and intense way.
And it's setting a scene for like everything that's going to happen and painting an entire picture instead of just, Captain America runs at the Nazis and punches Hitler. Like,
Right.
Elements of story that aren't strictly action.
All
Yes.
right. Well,
We
well,
should,
and
by
the
the way,
one-
what's
oh.
manga?
Yes. So one thing, the joke with Gundam that was kind of interesting, because I did want to get to this,
Oh, sorry.
is that it was just so brilliant. Is anytime a character starts to have an epiphany, you get the feeling they're going to die in the next 5 minutes. The minute they're like, they start talking about themselves, and they're like, oh my God, I've spent my entire life and I've never noticed that men have just been using me like a fucking tool for everything. Like, you're like, oh, we better finish her little portrait because she's about to die, and squish.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot. It's like a drinking game.
all right. So
What is manga?
you wanted
The
to ask?
Japanese word
Sorry.
for comics. It just means comics. When we say it, we are usually referring to comics produced and consumed in Japan and
Yes.
occasionally exported here. But it's really just the Japanese word for comics.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a technical term. If you break it down, it is actually like works more into like it's the breakdown of it is like a moving picture, like a picture that talks or something like that.
Yeah.
It's got like a weird little real meaning, but it's
Well,
the
you
Japanese
mean
word
if
for
you take
comic.
the kanji and
Break it apart. When we use it, though, we specifically use manga to refer to anything produced in Japan, in theory for Japanese consumption, that is then exported to the United States. There is like any word that's borrowed from a language, there's a lot of contention over what constitutes manga and what doesn't. My favorite example is Scott Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim looks like manga.
Yeah.
It's the size of manga. It's black and white. It's got a lot of the same pacing. It's got a lot of the same tropes that we'll be getting
Yeah.
into.
Two different pages of smooching, which is both hilarious for Scott Pilgrim and
very.
also characteristic.
It's but whether or not you would refer to this as manga is a bit of a piece of contention. I like to call this manga inspired or manga influenced.
Sure.
It is a Canadian comic. Canadian comic with heavy manga influence is the easiest way to differentiate.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
Your mileage may vary. And anime is animation usually based on existing properties, but not necessarily. It just means Japanese cartoons.
Japanese, any animation based animated in Japan for Japanese market initially. Although again, gets very blurry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Animation.
Animation. I think.
So let me throw out this question while we're kind of on the topic of it. This is from Bardic Outspiration. Bardic Outspiration. Oh, instead of inspiration.
Outspiration.
No, I get it. Bardic Outspiration.
I feel like bards would have bad breath.
10%
I'm just throwing
perspiration.
that out there.
Could that be a result of many Asian cultures being collectivistic, Since the U.S. is so individualistic and every individual's life ends, we value endings and closure. But with collectivism, it's about the group, community, and society, and it never really ends. So I think that what they're asking, like, there's sort of like a philosophical difference between the two cultures, and that can be kind of steep.
Many people have
influencing
written.
religions.
Many people have written upon this subject. There are pages and pages and pages.
Many people meaning Taliesin.
Well, this is not all just me.
Differences,
This
but
is other
they're
people.
very difficult to generalize about.
It's
Like,
difficult to generalize. I will say that we are as a culture, that the West definitely has an innate sense of justice and order to the universe, which is
yes.
doesn't exist anywhere else. That it's a very
when you
very
say
particular.
order to the universe.
Well, it all means something, doesn't it?
Okay, I guess order and meaning I might distinguish.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, it's again, these are difficult words because they mean a little bit something different
Right.
to every person who
Sure.
hears
Right.
them. But there is, and it's baked into our language. Our language, by its very nature, has phrasing and words and ideas that give us a sense of very individual self, that give us a sense of our connection to the world, that no matter what you believe, it's just hardwired in there, and you would have to beat it down with a stick every day of your life. And a lot of the Eastern languages, they legitimately use a different part of the brain. Like the brain, there are brain functions, and the things that you get better at when you learn like Japanese or Chinese as a foreign language are not the same skills that you use learning English or Spanish or French. It develops very, very differently, and there's less of a sense that this is all supposed to mean something, rather than the sense that this all means something, and it means what it is.
Right.
Which is a little. So there is some of that, and it does exist.
So are you saying that, like, in Western culture, there's typically like a sort of bent towards there's meaning outside of all of this?
My life has
Yes.
meaning,
Whereas
as opposed to
in,
life
in
is the
Eastern
meaning.
culture, it is this is the meaning in and of itself.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the Alan Watts "How did I grow" versus "How was I made."
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's almost too big, especially when talking about pop culture. Is like the big thing. The two big things I find is if comic books, if you think of like the ecology of comic books, we as the United States and Europe are a beautiful Australian desert garden, and Japan and Korea are a fucking tropical rainforest.
Yes.
Yeah, that is true.
There is so much. There is so much.
We are very
Yeah.
jealous, like, as American comic fans, when we find out how much manga's out there, how many people read it, how much has been already established in terms of the room for different genres and modes of storytelling, we get real jealous.
Yeah.
We get real jealous of the richness and variety of what's out there, even if it's mostly black and white.
Yeah.
Which I promise you get used to.
Yeah, and again, like, it also, there's manga, again, for, like, any stage of your life, and it's always part, so, like, there's stories that you're gonna find relevant as a child that are, you know, aimed at elementary school students, and you know, as I mentioned earlier, like, there's a lot of just kind of, like, slice of life stories that
Some of my favorites.
That was the revelation for me, like in junior high, was discovering like, oh, you can do comics about this, and they exist in American comics tradition, but they have been until quite recently, like very much on the sidelines.
Sure.
We're still fighting that fight of like the different kinds of things.
What's the weirdest manga you've ever found? What's the one that struck you as like they wrote a book about that? I'm trying to think. What would be the weirdest?
Well, because I was less struck by the outlandish stories than I was by the non-outlandish ones.
Yeah.
Like it was, I've talked about it before, but like Meisane Koku was one of the
Meisane
first
Koku.
books I ever read, and I was already a baby X-Men fan.
Sure,
and, like,
sure.
I love my X-Men to death, but I remember specifically, like as a junior high schooler, looking at this being like, these are stories about people in sweaters and jeans.
Yeah.
It was the sheer ordinariness of it that was the revelation to me, that I was just like, this is a guy who wants to pass a test. And this is a hilarious story
pitch the
about a
basic
dude.
story.
Okay, yeah. We've talked about this one a couple times just because it's very dear to me. So Yusuke Gurai, this guy like is trying to get into college and he's having a really hard time, and he has neighbors who are a terrible influence at this little apartment that he lives in. And he's like, I'm getting out of this apartment. And then the new apartment manager shows up, and she's the most beautiful woman he's ever seen, and he falls instantly madly in love. And so he stays in this like broken down old apartment with these complete nutballs of neighbors. And they have a romantic comedy that essentially goes on volume after volume after volume. with like there's a lot of very heart-wrenching emotional stuff that happens, and then there's just a lot of like really wacky comedy. There'll be things like he gets really drunk and he confesses something to her, and then one of his neighbors lies to him about what it is that he said. So he's like, I didn't mean it, I take it back. And it was him finally saying he loved her. And she was just like, oh, I guess you didn't mean it, you take it back. And it's like, it's just that forever, but it's so... that one does have resolution.
It does, but the resolution was almost an afterthought. It was like the series kind of ended, and then they're like, "Oh, I guess you guys wanted to see this." And it wasn't even in the animated version. They did the whole series, and they're like,
"I never saw the animated version."
Oh, well, then we'll do a movie that ends it. But like, it's one of the. I was thinking it's one of those rare ones that kind of has it, and especially for Takahashi, who's the creator, and she's a
She wrote and drew it. She's an industry unto herself, and one of the great legends that.
And for those who are like, oh, the idea of like this like apartment drama fantasy sounds kind of cute and fun. It is. It's very cute and very fun. She's also one of the richest women in Japan because of it.
This is
one
just
of the top 5 richest
Is she
women.
like a J.K. Rowling over there or something?
If J.K. Rowling wrote Dynasty and became famous, like not even that, like wrote Friends and became famous.
But she also does martial arts comedy. She also does like
weird fun aliens.
Stuff. She's also Inuyasha became tremendously famous. Yeah. Which is like that fantasy and mythological themes. Yeah. But this one hit for me because like in the background over the course of this series, you have like the main character ends up sort of finding himself and the thing that excites him, and you get really invested in all the minor characters, like they build this beautiful family out of what starts out as this sort of sitcom-y premise. But the idea that you could have a situation comedy told in a comic book that also breaks your heart sometimes, like that was the ordinariness of it was the revelation.
It was brilliant, and the amazing thing is, of course, it's not a revelation in Japan. The only thing that was a revelation was how good it was.
Yeah, and I think that is the thing, because Amy, I feel like I was also more struck by kind of the normal stories, and I mean the early manga that I was reading, it was like Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon, and so all of that felt like, oh, okay, these are sort of fantasy stories. That makes total sense. But when I started getting into some of the more like soap opera-y shoujo manga, like for example, like Hanagiri Dango. Like I was like, this is literally a story. So basically, Hanagiri Dango is about this girl who goes to, she basically ends up going to a really rich high school. And the high school is run by like these 4 hot guys, the F4, and they're terrible to everybody. It has been adapted.
They're called the F4.
The F4. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the 4 flowery boys or something like that.
The 4 flowers, because
the 4 flowers.
So
basically, and they're like,
I like it.
And they're like super nasty to everybody. And so then she basically just ends up standing up to them, and it's about their quest to like ruin her life. But meanwhile, of course, they all fall in love with her because she's so like spunky, and it's been made into multiple Japanese dramas. There's a Korean drama of it, and it's one of those things. So I've been watching a lot of Korean dramas lately, and it just kind of made me think back on some of those more like soap opera-y manga, and it was like, I believe that is the best-selling shoujo manga of all time.
It's certainly up there. It's brilliant. And
so you're saying
what's a shoujo manga?
Shoujo.
Shoujo.
So shoujo manga is there it is.
There we are.
Is manga that is directed at essentially teenage girls.
It's sort of a target demographic thing, and I think there's probably also like.
So and how do you spell it?
Shoujo is the most common.
Yeah.
Shoujo.
Shoujo.
There's only 5 basic vowel sounds in Japanese, and you can kind of a, I, U, E, O, and everything is basically built.
Spoiler alert: they're basically the Japanese vowels. So
you can.
I mean Spanish vowels.
Spanish
they're
helps.
Basically the Spanish vowels.
Yeah, I was like the Japanese vowels with the Japanese vowels. That's.
I didn't say what I thought I said. I said a different thing.
Manga is typically consumed, and this is typically in either weekly or monthly volumes.
Yeah, what's this thing?
That's a monthly volume. That's a Ribbon monthly.
Ribbon.
Which famously started Kodomo no Omocha, which is children's toys, which is one of my favorite manga about a child actress getting into a fight with a troubled boy at her school, and her mother has a squirrel. It's a whole thing. Fancy Lala, Little Witch Academia.
Yeah, I love Little Witch Academia.
And it's every month you get this giant book that has. Well, go.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
You can see that each volume is this enormous chunk for essentially, in this case, 550 yen, which is
that's $6, $7
$6. So you would buy this, and you would get a dozen different stories So it's just like this digest, this sampler pack of chunks of a bunch of different ongoing stories.
So
Here's a different one. Every color is you can see the color of the pages change, and it's a different story for every one. So and every month they put out about 10, 15 pages. And the consistency of the paper is about phone book.
Yeah.
It's like slightly above phone book, but not much.
So can you buy these volumes in America, written like translated into English, or are they pretty exclusively
Yeah,
in
the
Japanese?
turnaround on manga is not as fast as it is on anime, because the thing that's been really nice about anime lately is the phenomenon of the simulcast. So basically the same day that it is on Japanese TV, it's available typically on Crunchyroll is kind of the biggest provider. With manga, it takes time to translate things, so...
Yeah.
There's one exception, which is Shonen Weekly.
Yes!
Thanks to Viz.
And what is Shonen Weekly?
Remember Shoujo?
Shoujo.
Shoujo?
Which is the girls'
Shonen.
books. Shonen.
Boys.
I love you so
Sorry. No.
No,
It's the boys' books.
You're the best. I love
And
you.
Yay!
You're
This
such a-
one,
you're a
this
teacher
particular
at
one
heart,
is a
and I love
weekly,
that.
and there's more than
Yes.
just these. These are the ones that I happened to pick up today.
Yeah.
And Shonen Weekly, this particular one, I'm trying to get what's currently going on. Shonen Weekly, it's been around forever. They've started Cobra, Dr. Slump. One of my favorites, Orange Road.
Oh, I love Kimagure Orange
Orange Road
Road.
is amazing.
Yeah!
The other one, Dragon Ball, which was a lot of people's first
right,
manga,
right.
and Saint Seiya, which is very dear to my heart, which is
Are Shonen
Sailor
Jump and
Moon with
Shonen
Boys.
Weekly Jump the same?
No, they're different.
Okay, 'cause
Yeah.
this is connected at least.
Yeah.
Because
They're and like what's being currently what's inside of them changes and switches of like what's being presented, and there's lots of different books like this, and you kind of find your favorite, and there's ones that they have like their title characters, like their version of like it's like a cable channel of like here are the 3 shows that really get you: The Daily Show and South Park. But then there's like a bunch of other stuff too, and like they hope that it catches.
it's like if the cable channel showed up and it had like, so we've just picked up Game of Thrones, we're adding it to our lineup, but you're also getting, I'm gonna mix my networks. What
Go
else
ahead.
is on
You're
HBO?
also getting
Silicon Valley.
Westworld and
Westworld.
Big Little Lies.
Yeah, like here's your new shipment. You've got like,
And Last Week Tonight, and
yeah.
it's all here because you like you like our taste,
Yeah.
and so you think that we're probably gonna have good taste.
So if one of these magazines was HBO, somebody might start a competitor and be like, essentially, we're the AMC. We're gonna have similar but slightly different things. We're gonna try to land high-profile creators with interesting projects that'll be eye-catching to you, and then take your money.
So these are designed. These are not designed to be collected. They're designed to be disposable.
Yeah.
They do not collect, quote unquote. They're not really big comic book collectors in Japan. It's not a country that really thinks of things that way. This is designed to be gotten rid of once you're done. I'm sure some people collect them. I have no idea how, because my apartment was the size of this table when I lived there.
And it's part of why the flowering of comics is connected to the 20th century and the ease of cheaply printing a ton of stuff on inexpensive paper.
What happens to these books eventually, if they're popular, is that they then get turned into these micro editions, with these pocket editions, which are just one book, and you can see the original printing was very, very large, and then the new printing is very, very small,
Yes.
so that you can carry it with
Hilariously,
you.
because it is trendy, this edition of Meisane Koku, despite being in Japanese, has an English introduction on the front, just because English words look
Oh, and here we have Koko wa Greenwood. Here's Greenwood, which is a great little high school.
Hilariously,
lore.
this is a famous story that it turns out I bought a volume of just because sometimes I buy things because they look cool and never got around to reading, and is the basis for the title of today's episode.
Oh yeah,
amazing.
I'm a
Taliesin
big,
Jaffe.
and here's another one of my favorites. This is Beck,
Yep.
Mongolian Chop Squad, which is a story about a bunch of Japanese kids who decide to start a Western style rock band.
So, Fyffe Butt has
Hey,
a question.
oh,
Yes,
good.
Fluffy Butt.
Why so much high school?
For high schoolers,
Yeah.
it's
But
It's-
if
but it's like-
everyone in the culture is reading the comics, including like the adults, why is there is the high school aimed directly at the high
This
school?
is more our
There's a
taste.
filter.
Yeah.
This is the stuff we discovered.
Yes.
Mostly when we were young.
Yeah,
So it'd be
we-
like exploiting American culture and being like, why is everything like, if mostly what you got was CW shows?
That's exactly what I was gonna say. This is
Yeah,
their
that's what
the
that's what I'm
CW.
that's what I'm looking at, going like, all right, well that sounds cool. Like I have an appreciation for that.
Yeah.
we can show some stuff that's not that.
Yeah.
Anything from
Well, hello.
Lone Wolf and Cub.
Sure.
I was trying to find my copy of Eagle, which is a story about a president of the United States.
Nice. I haven't read that one.
Lupin. Arsene
Yeah.
Lupin. This is an interesting book. This never happened. This is a big thing that never happens. This is a crossover manga.
Dang.
I have never heard of a crossover manga, and I saw it and I died. This is 2 manga characters different everything
Yeah.
meeting. It's Lupin III, who is a very famous Japanese manga character, who's the grandson of the French Arsène Lupin, the gentleman thief.
Yes.
But he's kind of a lecherous thief who's got a bunch of friends and they steal stuff all over the world. It's very 70s.
It's really fun.
And he's fighting a boy detective, future boy Conan, who's a boy version of Arthur Conan Doyle, the world's greatest detective. Greatest boy detective versus greatest thief.
It's literally a crossover made of two characters with their own storytelling traditions that have been borrowed from other places.
Yeah.
Like, it's...
Wow.
It's just happening in every
culture
direction.
all the way down. I don't know.
So what would be the two books that you would want to read to get like how wacky that crossover is? Does that make sense? So like Lupin, what is his book and what is
His
the boy
book
detective?
is Lupin III.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's been running since forever, since the 70s. By written, most things also are written and
Yeah.
drawn by the same person.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing too is that with manga, a lot of it will run forever and ever and ever and ever,
Like decades.
and it will honestly be the same story that it was from the very beginning. They don't tend to like stop and reboot everything.
Very
Or
rarely.
if they do, it's like it's interesting because there's two models. There's the run it forever for decades,
Right.
or there's the Gundam model where it's like
Right.
do another one that's only vaguely connected.
Yes,
at all.
exactly. But yeah, something like Lupin, like that. Technically, it's the same guy for all of it since
His pen name
since
is
the
Monkey
70s,
Punch.
Yeah.
His pen name is Monkey Punch. I've actually gotten to meet him. He's a fascinating guy.
That's awesome.
And it's got a very 70s aesthetic. It's very sexy and very
Yeah.
sleek. He drove a Fiat. That's why I love Fiats, is because one of the cars, he drove a classic Mercedes-Benz for a while. He's got a disgraced samurai buddy and an American gangster from Chicago are his two friends. And they're always being chased by a Japanese Interpol police officer named Zenigata.
Yeah.
And it's great. And then Conan is a little bit more fun and is a little more childish, I would say. There's Lupin and
Hey!
not Fujiko. That's not Fujiko.
well. Fujiko Mina is an interesting character unto herself.
She's actually had her own manga.
She
as well.
has, yeah.
She's kind of the Catwoman of his
She
world.
is.
She is this sexy jewel thief.
And initially, like the reason, initially it was going to be Monkey Punch had like a difficult time apparently, like drawing different looking women. So it seems to be a pretty common problem.
Monkey Punch is the name of the creator.
Writer artist.
Yeah, writer and
And
artist.
they're almost all of these are writer artists of just
Yeah.
one person.
Can you guys tell that I know
although we
nothing
should
about
say-
manga? Like,
No, that's just important.
Yeah.
Like a big difference is it's much more common for the same person to write and draw in the
Yes,
mainstream
it is.
Japanese. Although over time you also get studios.
Right, and
Essentially,
also
like, you don't have time and you've been doing this for 25
and
years.
manga
you just
circles.
find this.
I have some clamp on my
have some
iPad.
clamp on
Yeah,
your
here,
iPad.
let me get some.
Let me clear the
I
board.
almost brought Chobits.
Ah, yes. Yeah, I have Magic Knight Rayearth on here.
Oh, bless you.
Yep.
Rayearth. Rayearth is fun.
Yeah. So yeah, you can see here.
Oh, perfect.
Here's a little Magic Knight Rayearth. So Clamp, they actually are a doujinshi. Well, they started off as a doujinshi circle.
We're going to have to.
actually,
We're
which
going to
we'll-
explain that.
We'll
later.
talk about that in a second. But yeah, they're like a manga. They're a group of mangaka, which are basically creators. So some of them write,
The
some of
ending
them
"ka"
draw.
there is just telling you person who does things.
Yeah.
And it's an all girl collective. If I
It is an
recall.
all-girl collective, and they write interesting sort of shoujo manga. This particular one, Magic Knight Rayearth, you can see the three main girls there, Umi, Fu, and Hikaru.
Fu was always.
Oh yeah, she's my
Yeah.
fave too. She's so adorable with her glasses. But yeah, so basically, again, and it's like it's more of a creative collective, but like they always work together. It's not like one of them would go randomly work with like Naoko Takeuchi, the creator of Sailor Moon.
No,
or
you get
something.
written by Clamp
Yeah.
is kind of
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and they wrote a ton of
so
stuff.
so much good
It
stuff.
was very interesting because we like Chobits is one of those series that we studied it in a class because essentially our professor was sort of saying, is this like it's a work that self-parodies?
Yeah.
That is drawn out of a tradition of like, are you being deliberately over the top because you want to do the thing or because you want to make fun of the thing? And it's like, can you do both at the same time? And it's this sort of like this lens of critical analysis that was just like, it was a fascinating example of like, in what way are you using these sort of tropes of like robot girlfriend?
Oh wow,
And what do you mean by it?
you just reminded me of a whole thing we're gonna have to get into. Oh man. So doujinshi, or unless you had.
No, we've got a lot of questions.
Okay,
Do you want to save them or do you want to keep talking?
I think let's just cover doujinshi
Real quickly since
Okay.
I've mentioned it.
Hey, I have a comic book I want to make, and I have not been accepted into one of these giant phone books. What do I do? Well, there's independent press in Japan, and it's called doujinshi. Doujinshi is the independent press where you do. They tend to be a little more Western style. This is one of my prized possessions. It's only about 20 pages. It's by a man named Yoshitaka Abe, who is a very popular doujinshi artist and writer, who also worked on Serial Experiments Lane is what he's mostly known for, but he's worked in animation studios. This is a story he wrote and it's a little weird for doujinshi, which is about a girl who works in a pharmacy but doesn't speak. She's a little spectrumy, so she writes everything on cards, and the whole book is just her kind of having conversations and kind of flirting with a guy a little bit for 20 pages, and then it's over.
And you say it's weird for doujinshi because most doujinshi, so let's say you like a series and you maybe particularly like two characters in that series and you want them to be together in a explicitly sexy way.
Yes, let's think is a thing that developed separately on separate continents. Because as it turns out, and this like okay, and this might just be my thing, but like the false idea that women don't want sexy material is put the lines put to that very distinctly by two separate traditions of basically primarily text fan fiction over here and doujinshi and other subgenres over there.
Yep.
Along with many other things, but that has always cracked me up because it's just like, yes, tell me more about what women don't want.
There's a con called Kamike.
Yeah, comic for sure.
That happens in Japan, and it's basically it puts Comic-Con to shame. It's the size of two football fields.
I want to see it.
It's two football fields of just Artist Alley. Like if you take Artist Alley in San Diego Comic-Con and make two football fields full of tightly packed tables of people selling these.
Yep.
Wow.
The one they made.
And again, the presence of a variety of sexuality and sexualities and sexual material in that, like, it's hyper visible to us because it's something that has been like that marks it as different. But like, you've got the entire world of storytelling.
It's also a great way to get noticed when you're in two football fields worth of independent
That is
press.
true. That is
It
true.
is a really good. I mean, like they have fun making it, and they love making it, and they trade them and collect them. And you do kind of place bets on this kid's going to be a star one day, and I've got their 15 pages.
Well, and as I mentioned, like Clamp actually started off as a doujinshi circle, and they primarily wrote Saint Seiya doujinshi.
Yes, they did. That is in no way how I found them, I'm going to say. Saint Seiya is basically Sailor Moon with boys, by the way. Saint Seiya is Sailor Moon with boys.
It's Sailor Moon with boys, for sure.
Very pretty boys.
Yeah.
They're very pretty.
And that's called Sensei
Saint
Seiya.
Saint
Seiya. All right.
Yeah.
They all get their powers from the constellations. And like the goddess, the reincarnation of Athena, bestows 5 champions to defend her against other evil gods who reincarnate and get powered armor and fight by yelling really loudly.
Yep.
And it's great.
He just takes this blind spot, I think.
There's a lot of Saint Seiya on Crunchyroll too, so it's pretty easy to access.
I own every figure
I love
from
that.
the 1982 run. I have them all.
Yes.
I have the one you had to
This
send
Taliesin
in
is the
box
best
tops
Taliesin.
for.
The Taliesin is the
Box top Taliesin.
I sent in
Yes.
box tops to Japan
Oh
to
my
get the
God.
send away Sagittarius gold
You
armor.
did not!
Oh, I
You
did.
mailed them to Japan!
I cut barcodes out of my boxes.
Oh my god.
And sent a lot of postage.
That is amazing.
Oh
That
my
is
God.
incredible.
I had
I think
a problem.
that one sentence describes everything about Taliesin. Like, if you knew that one thing about Taliesin as
I
a
was in
tiny child,
Yeah.
you, I think, would get Taliesin in a lot of ways.
I was in a meeting with Pioneer at one point, or Jenny On, and I think it was still Pioneer at the time. They're like, "Yeah, we might be getting Saint Seiya," and literally, I ran to my car, I bolted to my car, came back with 3 toys from my trunk of like the classic probably worth $80 to $150 a piece.
Right.
Drop them on the table and says, "These are yours. I have extras. I really want to direct that." It's like,
Did you direct it?
no. Oh! It's okay. I haven't
Did they
direct-
keep your toys?
Yes.
What?
I had more.
But that's no, that's not right.
Shady. Come on.
That's not shady. It was a gift. It was a gift
Yeah,
given.
freely given.
It was a gift. It was a gift freely given without
All right.
I got a story out of it.
All
I'm
right.
pleased.
All right.
It is a good story.
It is a good story.
It is a good story.
No, it went to Texas. It didn't even go to. It went all the way to
yeah.
Texas, and they
Texas
are aware that I
steals
love it.
everything.
They do. They steal everything. we
I'm
love.
from Texas, so I can say that. I'm allowed to.
Question.
Andrea Cordes asks, "Does Matt read manga? He seems confused. I don't. I don't, and I am confused."
Matt's here to check us. Matt is
Yeah.
currently is and every week we need somebody who's here to keep us to make sure that we're not losing all of
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. To
Yeah,
be
and
like
I'm-
you're
I'm
going too deep.
doing
Nobody
my best,
understands.
but you guys are saying so many words that I don't understand that I don't even know what questions to ask half
There's
the time. I'm trying
no, we gotta
real
slow
hard,
down
though.
then.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll slow down, but like this, there are too many things to read on planet Earth, so there's
Yeah.
just no way to read it all. And I worry about anyone who has read everything. They're lying.
That's true.
They have problems with their identity, and they're worried about you thinking that they're not cool
So let me
enough.
ask this. This is from Jinquisitor. I heard there was a Star Wars manga. As a fan of the Dark Horse comics, I have to ask, is that true?
Okay,
is.
so yeah, there's actually today there was an announcement too that Lost Stars, which is a new canon novel, it's a young adult novel, is being adapted into a manga. So yeah, that'll be really neat.
Adam Warren.
I wanted-
did a couple
Adam
of
Warren
the
did the Star Wars
manga
manga.
style
Yeah.
Star Wars
Yeah,
manga.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was I think there was like an actual Star Wars manga, and then there was an Adam Warren. Adam Warren is a American artist who does manga style. Who's
Yeah.
highly manga influenced. He's done some great stuff. He did
He does a book called Empowered. He did a
Empowered.
book that we apparently both discovered as a teenager, which was a Gen 13 spinoff called Magical Girl Roxy.
Magical Drama Queen.
Magical
I
Girl
had,
Roxy.
I had to double it. I had to double check. I
you're
wrote it
right.
down. I wrote it down.
That's awesome.
Yep.
I wrote it down. Yeah, so I got it
Which
wrong. my
was
first round.
a point of connection probably for both of us between the two separate reading traditions we had at that time, where we were like, what?
Well,
You
and
can look at it this way?
Roxy is a character in Gen 13, but she was kind of supposed to be like the hip teen character in Gen 13, so she was into the animes and the mangas.
Right.
So he did a book where she has like a bad cheese dream,
Taliesin
basically.
is using these because animes and mangas, you
Not-
don't normally pluralize
No,
them.
you don't.
No.
It's like the series of tubes.
Yeah.
But in her dream, she hits every trope. There's Adam Warren's,
awesome.
Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yep.
But she dreams entirely in like the westernized view of Japanese anime tropes and manga tropes, which is really funny
That's
if you
great.
go into it because it's a bunch of in jokes for people who read.
So Frankenstein 1912 wants to know, could you please explain what Shonen Jump is?
It's the name
yeah,
of the
it's the
magazine. There's a weekly and a monthly. It looks like. But it's a very famous magazine because a bunch of the like all-time greatest hit comics have
Yeah.
started in either Jump or Jump Weekly. Maybe
I covered a couple
this
of them.
guy and
Bleach.
maybe-
Bleach,
Yeah.
yeah, Bleach
Maybe
started
Naruto?
there.
Bleach,
Naruto also.
Yeah.
Probably Bleach and Naruto. Don't.
Yeah.
No,
It says
Bleach-
ShonenJump.com on the back. I'm safe.
You know, it is. I looked that one up. That was definitely correct.
Yeah.
But it's one of the collections that you get either weekly or monthly, and I think they even have like a couple other like quarterlies. They've got a bunch of them, and it's kind of the gold standard.
And the
Yeah,
name
I
implies
would
that
agree
the
with
comics
that.
are for boys, although obviously it has like a very wide readership.
Gender issues in manga are fascinating too. You brought this up yesterday, which was the '60s revolution
Yes,
that we talked about.
the 49ers, I think, is what they're
Yeah.
called, right?
Do you want to cover it or should
A
I?
little bit, like, because there were
Yeah.
there are a lot of legendary figures in the world of manga, but one like and a lot of it we trace back especially to Tezuka, working like in the post World War II. But you also get
Tezuka created Astro Boy. Tezuka
Yes.
created Phoenix, the Princess Prince. There's just a series of amazing stories. He was kind of like one of the. I don't know.
he's called the god of manga.
Manga no Kami. God of manga. He was the guy who like really brought the art form to the front.
Where'd Astro Boy go?
Where did Astro Boy go? There he is.
There it is.
There's a beautiful.
A lot
Beautiful.
of formal innovation and stuff that are traceable to his work. But
The White Lion. Kimba the
Oh,
White
Kimba
Lion.
White Lion, yeah.
Boom.
So you also get, and there were women working in the form from the beginning, but you get a very notable crop of them who all happen to be born in the same year. year 26 of whichever era it was. But they're kind of known in English as like the 49ers because that was their birth year. And in the like late 60s, a bunch of women creators sort of just took the place by storm and created works like Rose of Versailles.
Yeah. Oh my God. I literally got chills when you mentioned Rose of Versailles.
I bought a very expensive Rose of Versailles, which is about Rose of Versailles is a story. Oh, well, go ahead, Rose of Versailles.
Well, I mean, Rose of Versailles, it's about basically Marie Antoinette, and it's about this woman who's sort of she's like her bodyguard. Yeah.
Oscar.
Lady Oscar.
Lady Oscar.
But Lady Oscar, her father didn't really know what to do with her as a girl, so she's like lived her whole life basically as a man. She's not per se like pretending to be a man, but like she fights with a sword and
she wears a suit.
Yeah, exactly.
She looks like she's in the cast of Hamilton. Looks very good.
She
She's
does.
Like she's got a sword. She's a brilliant sword fighter, which is why.
Yeah, so it's all about her kind of like trying to like keep Marie Antoinette in check.
And Marie Antoinette's just eyes sparkling.
Oh my God, it's so true. She's the most shoujo thing to like ever live.
Yeah, so it's action and romance, and it was sort of this like massive hit.
My big one was Candy of that.
Oh yes,
Candy.
I only recently, a couple years ago at Anime Expo, I was interviewing Liesl Wilkerson, and I got into this conversation about Candy, and I was like, what is this? Where's this been my whole life?
I don't know Candy.
So literally, okay. So like I used to work at a Japanese anime and Asian cinema video store, and one of the ways I bonded with the owner, this guy named Enrique Vasquez, was we were just talking. I mentioned that I had some Candy manga. He's like, oh, that was my favorite growing up, man. Like, holy shit. And we just like bonded over. I miss you, Enrique. You're a wonderful human being. And yes, it's about this little blonde girl traveling through this fantasy Europe, which I will get into in a moment, why that's a thing. And just every terrible thing that could possibly happen.
Literally.
It's just a series of unfortunate events.
It is, I mean, and like this is like spoilers for Candy, I'm sorry.
Everybody dies.
But yeah, literally, like there's like this main love interest guy, and you're like, cool, and then he kill him off.
Just set him on fire. Parents gotta die and go to live with the uncle. The uncle's evil. That's okay, he's gonna get like stabbed. That's all right. He's gonna live with the cousins. House burns down. Boom. Just over and over and over.
So he's like Job, like he just like
Just
yeah.
Well, and there was like another, and like there was like this is where Magical Girl began starting because we got Hanano Lunlun and Creamy Mommy, which were like the original like magic staff turns me into things, Saint Tail. And the Hanano Creamy Mommy got famous because like it never really quite caught on, and so at the very end they were just trying to figure out how to end it, and he's just like had her get run over by a dump truck.
Yeah, it was.
And because that was like such a weird way to end basically Sailor Moon, but with a tinier, younger girl.
Right.
You're like,
so wait, the main
no, everyone was like, I want more. Or less.
Kind of.
More or less.
They killed the main character with a dump truck?
There's Candy.
Candy.
She's so plucky.
Look like she is bound for a life of horrifying tragedy.
No,
That's,
she is made.
That's
she is
what
plucky.
she's in for, though.
So
No, wait, she got killed by a dump truck?
In Creamy Mommy.
Yeah, Creamy Mommy.
Yeah.
What is Creamy Mommy?
It's one of the. It's
very
essentially
complicated.
I mean, there was stuff before it that kind of qualifies as.
I feel like all of a
Magical
sudden
Girl.
this is just one show in and of itself. Like I'm.
No, okay, so basically the Magical Girl genre kind of, some people say that it officially sort of starts with Sally the Witch, and then there was also a manga, an anime series called Princess Knight, which also has some like elements that carry over into what we think of as Magical Girl today, particularly when you look at stuff where you've got like magical girls with swords, like in Ray Earth or in like Revolutionary Girl Utena. But Creamy Mommy was the first instance of like cute mascot character and magical transformation item. And again, it's like, but this is a genre, Magical Girl. And it did not, as Taliesin was saying, like it never really gained the popularity of like eventually a Sailor Moon or a Cardcaptor Sakura. And so, yeah,
They just kind of like, they just kind of decided to just like drop a bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, because you're at that point, because you know you've been sitting in a room for a few years drawing and writing this thing. Why not? So an interesting thing of there are a lot of women. Like it's not the way it is here. I'm trying to
there's
think.
a lot of lady mangaka.
There's a lot, and especially when you go into the doujinshi world, that number goes through the roof.
Doujinshi.
Yeah, the
Doujinshi
independent
is
press.
the self-published.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
indie press. And like that's I guess a thing with Japan and gender is that it would be inaccurate to idealize anything about gender relations in Japan.
No.
But you also can't assume that the pitfalls are the same ones that we're
They're
familiar
not.
with here.
Yeah, they're not.
They're
And
different pitfalls.
And it is very interesting because, and I mean, Amy, you touched on this a little bit too, of like kind of the gender relations and the various types of relationships we see within manga, particularly manga that's aimed at women.
Yeah.
You get a lot more, and again, as you say, like the actual gender relations in Japan, super problematic. But within manga, a lot of the time you will have lesbian couples and you will have gay couples, and
for a lot of us, like Sailor Moon was one of the first fictional works where I encountered lesbians.
Characters.
And it was a lot of what we think of as progressive content, like finds a home in this giant world of everything being published there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a revelation for Japan that there's
No.
this pair of lesbians with superpowers
not at
just
all.
chilling out. They were like, yeah, that fits in the genre pretty nicely.
Yeah.
It's practically a trope.
So, is homosexuality, lesbianism, like transgender, all that, like, is that more accepted in Eastern culture? Like, I'm ignorant of that because, like, it doesn't seem like it is.
Different pitfalls.
Yeah.
It's different pitfalls. It's a very different relationship, but I would say probably a hell of a lot better. But they have a cultural context with it. Thankfully, they have especially for gay men. There's like a really good cultural context.
There is.
Because they have the Bishonen myth of the notion of like there's this notion of
Bishonen means essentially beautiful man.
beautiful man,
pretty boy.
pretty boy.
Yeah, better translation.
And this is the thing that we run into. I used to do a lot of translation adaptation work, and one of the things that we always came into is translating Bishonen characters in English is really, really tricky because of the cultural context, which is that the vibe that you get because of these cultural myths of these, especially the Bishonen myth is one of this great gay samurai, basically, who was shitty to women, banged all the men, and killed everybody who got in his way. And so it's very much how we kind of treat British villains in these stories, which is why often when you get Bishonen characters in anime, whereas in Japan they would almost have kind of the lilt. But we always play them like this because this is sort of because it's if you can imagine in Japan, it's that moment if someone comes in with just a little bit of that Dan Savage hello, and like the cultural reaction to that is, oh shit, about to fuck up, oh my god, gonna kill some fucker. You know, like that's just sort of that's their like, oh, badass in the room, he's gonna fuck some shit up.
It's funny. I've talked to some people who have done some voices for like Bishonen characters or villainous characters of that ilk as well, and
Crispin, yes.
and it was so I remember Keith Silverstein specifically talking to me about one where he was like, he couldn't remember which character it was, but he like looked at him and he's like, oh, okay, so he's sort of like soft-spoken and kind of lame, all right, great, and then the director goes, so this guy's really sexy, and Keith was like, okay, great, got it.
Reattune. So the cultural context is different?
It's totally different.
So in America, where like the homosexual like male like that trope is
lilty,
a little like I don't like
lilty's
not
the
like
word.
Feminine, like
Different pictures.
Delicate and dangerous, I suppose, would be a bit more of the refined delicate.
It is. It is really interesting though that you bring that up about like homosexuality in Japanese storytelling, because you're so right.
Yeah,
like it is that like they're very like manly, but like still really beautiful. There's like this weird androgyny about it, almost
like,
very
they're
dangerous.
dangerous.
Very dangerous, and a lot of
there exists a model that's sort of like men or like women want him, men also want him.
Well, and that's
it's
that's
very,
the thing
like,
that's very, very interesting about it, is because there is kind of this whole subgenre within both shoujo and then josei, which is anime, which is manga that is directed at adult women.
Yes.
There is this whole subgenre that is about homosexual relationships, and it is not aimed at homosexual men. It is specifically aimed at women.
Yes.
And it comes from what you're saying, Taliesin, that whole thing of like the like men want to be with him, women want him. Like it's just
I mean that on top of like the Takarazuka theater.
Yes.
Like we were talking
my
about
God.
that. So Japan, just to poke at this, there's an all-women's theater troupe, a very famous all-women's theater troupe in Tokyo called the Takarazuka Theater. They're over 100 years old, and all the women in the troupe, it's
all women.
It's all women. They play the men. They did a version of Chicago recently, which was
They
fabulous.
tend to do everything the musical.
They really
Everything
do.
musical.
Yeah, they're doing they did a Scarlet, like they literally took like the Frank Wildhorn musical Scarlet Pimpernel and did a version of it. It's so good.
And it's so hot.
Yeah.
It's so hot.
Yeah. The current iterations of so Sailor Moon obviously is like this huge phenomenon in Japan. There's been multiple anime series. There's the manga. There was a live action series, and there's been 25, I want to say, just ballpark musicals.
That's probably a safe number.
And the current iteration of Sailor Moon musicals are a lot of Takarazuka alumni, so they are all women productions. And Yuga Yamato, who plays Tuxedo Mask, very famous performer in the Takarazuka review. She was Roxy in the Chicago.
Oh God, she was.
Yeah, but she normally plays men's roles. And like, I remember the first time I saw her come out on stage as Tuxedo Mask, and I was like, oh my God. Like, I identify as mostly straight, but like,
No, that's and it's and
I've never actually seen Takarazuka, and I've always
Oh
wanted
my
to.
God.
we're going to YouTube after this. And we're going to delve deep. It's also a drag culture, very much like
Yeah.
England. So there's that, but like it all mixes up because there's so much cultural information in there. It means that
Drag being just putting on the
Putting
like,
on-
the gender signifiers of what is considered the opposite one,
Sure.
if there were to.
Sure,
Yeah.
and it's especially in the theater. There's a lot of that in Japan. They have a nice long cultural history of that, but because of that, because they're almost over troped. It can be a lot of complication
Yeah.
for like actual Japanese men and women to be like, it's a little much, and like people are can be dickish about things.
So is there a different? So homosexual men have like that sort of like dangerous, but like, is there something?
there is actually
Like,
another. There is
lesbian-
another
with lesbian
subgenre
women, like-
that not as much.
Not as much.
It's treated very differently.
Yeah.
It's not as given as much of a pass.
Yeah. Again,
It's very weird.
you also
I don't quite-
find-
I've never
Is
gotten
it
a handle
more
on it.
taboo or a little less? Like,
Taboo-
No,
That's
it's
not the word.
not the word, because again, you find lesbian relationships in manga that's aimed at women pretty frequently, and it's not
Taboo is one of those
it's
words
not,
that only exists in a you need a
Yeah.
monotheistic language to come
and
up with
and I also feel like
Weird.
within Japanese storytelling that lesbians aren't as like sort of fetishized
Not at
as
all.
much as they are in American culture, which is the opposite with gay men. That
Right,
is
they're
very
tremendously
much that's
Very
tremendously
fetishized.
fetishized
In Japanese
within
culture.
Japanese storytelling.
tremendously. Like that's actually part of the problem is
Yes.
that it's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like the same thing that always struck me, especially like finding out it existed, as this positive thing of like women making a space for their sexuality.
Yeah.
It does have this dangerous edge of like by turning other people and their lives into your weird little fetish
there is-
object, exactly like
there
dudes
is
watching lesbian porn.
Definitely
Like,
a lot
great,
of cultural
cool,
now
interesting.
kiss. Ah.
There is.
And it's interesting because it has both of those sides, both of those elements to the storytelling.
And I think that there obviously it's problematic, but again, like as you're saying, Amy, like it comes from this good place of like women wanting to explore their sexual fantasies without actually having any women involved.
And if,
I mean, that's what it is.
It's also like, I mean,
Yeah.
and I would say this, like, for fan fiction, I feel I'm pretty confident about saying this, like, taking women out of the picture, like, removes the possibility of women being exploited in the story.
It does.
In this
does.
weird way that serves as, like,
Yeah.
a comedy
And-
backdrop. Like,
and I'll say this as if no other reason as commentary as someone who goes and plays pretend on the internet every
Yeah,
week for fun and profit. If your exploration isn't a little bit problematic, you're probably doing it wrong.
Yep.
I mean, like it's exploration for a reason. If it of course it's going to be a little problematic,
Yeah.
but it's, you have to kind of walk that edge to see the boundaries of the territory.
Yep.
all right.
Yep.
Something worth mentioning also for women, just because I have these notes that I haven't pulled out in years.
Yeah, sorry. Wait.
I know.
This is just a, this
One
is
of-
a discussion.
There's so
panel.
much to talk
Yeah.
about. One of the interesting things about women in manga that I was and it's one of those things that kind of was a revelation for me was the 60s in Japan were not the Western 60s. They did not have a
Yeah.
cultural revolution in the 60s. There was the Beatles were not happening for them.
You had Kaguya Hime.
The 60s in Japan sucked. The 60s in Japan were recession, poverty, and unhappiness, and people just coming to terms with the fact that you just lost a war on a profound level. Almost instantaneously. You were doing great until the moment you weren't. And no one was in a good mood. No one knew what to do with themselves, and one of the things that's cited as the reason we got so many of the popular female characters from the shoujo manga of the 1960s were blonde-haired girls living in Europe. It was a lot of women going, there's got to be a place in the world where we're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And so they kind of created this Disneyized, fetishy Europe where they could place their characters. Like Oscar from Rose of Versailles couldn't exist in Japan back then. That's a character that would have not had any place. But in fantasy Europe,
Right.
where women are treated better.
During the French Revolution.
During the French Revolution.
Works out real well.
But it created a sandbox where they're like, we can tell stories about strong women happening somewhere else.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it ain't happening here. And so you got a lot of those, like Candy, who's it's like whatever faux European Cinderella world she comes from, even with all the terrible shit that happens to her, or Honolulu, and where a lot of that.
So let me ask you this: where like Western comics so oftentimes have that whole thing of like every comic could be someone's first, like, and you can marginally jump into any story, and if you dig enough, you'll figure out some context.
We do not have that.
No,
in Japan.
not in
So in manga, you start at number 1 and go. You can't like jump in. At,
you can
10 years into the culture
you
or
could
the
jump
myth.
in
Or...
10 years in, but just expect that 10 years of stuff have already happened, and you're going to have to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay, so it is somewhat similar to America, just a little less accessible.
Well, it's not that every
more?
comic was someone's first. It's that this comic was your first because everyone reads comics. So you started here.
But he means, like, in terms of continuity and long-running series and the stuff that we're always talking about, the challenges of getting new readers into something.
Yeah,
how is it handled with a series that goes for
Because
27 volumes?
we have a
57
lot of
volumes?
questions of where do we start? Who's your favorite
it
author?
depends.
Like,
It kind of depends on the series. So, like, I would argue that if you wanted to get into, say, Ranma 1/2, which is great, that's one that, like, I would honestly, with that one, it's like you can, if you read the first few chapters, that kind of like establishes who the characters are, and then once we like kind of figure out the tropes of those characters, not that much really changes.
It's literally a trope machine.
Yeah.
Like I had a whole essay on Rama as basically a commedia dell'arte, where it's like all the characters have rules of engagement, and you just kind of clash them against each other, and watch what happens, and their rules meet their rules.
You get a thing like TV writers in America talk about the story engine. What's the thing that sort of gives you endless ideas for stuff that could happen? And Ranma has one of the best ones, which is the idea that there is a cursed training ground you can go to in China where there's a bunch of pools that people tragically drown in, and if you fall into one of them, then you now gain this magical quality. Hot water turns you into
a thing.
Hot water puts you back. Cold water turns you.
Cold water turns you.
Hot
Hot water
water
turns you back.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Cold water transforms you into, say, a person of a different gender, or a pig, or a cat, or a panda bear.
A duck, a panda.
So
cat.
do you choose what it turns you into?
Nope, you fell into that pool because
There's
you were
a tour
idiot.
guide who tells you, you fell into Naonichuan. Naonichuan, a tragic pool. It's a tragic pool where a pig drowned 100 years ago.
So it's sort of like, it's a parody of sort of mythology things of like the idea there's a cursed pool that does this, except in this case, like there's this cursed pool outlet. Like this one place where there's a million of these, and it turns out that everyone in this main character's life has sort of ended up falling somehow into one of these cursed pools. And so you get like, and it's another high school story and another one that I discovered early on, but it's sort of like, you get daily life where if you drop hot water on someone, they transform, and if you drop cold water, they turn back. So the main character is literally a girl half the time and a boy half the time. Yeah. And it's not like, it's just part of the premise of that series.
And he's kind of a dude bro.
Yeah,
he is.
I mean, he's a bit. He's a.
But he
he's
falls
bro-y.
He's a bit fuckboy.
He
Just a bit.
He is a
He
little bit.
ends up like he has an arranged marriage to a tomboy.
She's
full
awesome.
Like, I bonded on her.
Oh my
Akane
god,
Tendo was
Akane's
the shit.
best.
Actually, I was always about Nabiki, the other sister.
Oh, the big
there's three
sister.
sisters.
Yeah.
But like,
So
sorry,
it's
too much.
it's a comedy built on that story engine, but that means that you can show up on any volume and it's just like, why are they fighting this guy? He's in love with one or the other of them, and he uses a crazy martial art. Go.
And overall, you know, with a lot of those sort of longer running series, like your Dragon Balls or your Naruto's,
Dragon Balls.
Dragon
Well, there's
Balls.
lots of Dragon Ball series. There's Dragon Ball
It's
and
just
then
fun
Dragon
to
Ball
do
Z.
Dragon Balls, that's all.
But
Continuity tends to be a bit of a novelty.
yeah. And you know, with a lot of them, especially the ones that take.
But they like when you say continuity tends to be a bit of a novelty, like
They exist.
I
And-
mean,
and you're like,
volume
ooh.
27 of Ranma, everything in the first 26 volumes has happened.
Yeah.
It's just not going to be
Important.
necessary for you to
Sure,
like, know what's
sure.
going on here.
But then on top of that, it's like you also within there's a lot of manga that's not that long and is really nice self-contained stories. So that I feel like is almost a better place to start.
It is, and the thing that Japan does that we don't have here is also they have a thriving used bookstore market, and they're not comic book collectors, which means that when you finish with Berserk Volume 1, you return it to the bookstore and buy a new one.
I have the book off sticker is still on this
Book
copy.
off.
Super cheap books.
Going
Go to
into
Book
going
Off.
in, there's a store called Mandarake that I used to go to in Tokyo, and Mandarake they just have everything, and there's just piles of it, and you're like, I'm just gonna pick up 1 through 5 today, and you go home and you read them, and then you sell them back for like a third of the price and get a bunch more.
And I wonder
Wow.
also, is our view of this distorted by the fact that, like, if it doesn't make it to 57 volumes, no one may bother translating it into English.
That's
so there's
also
probably
right.
a ton of wonderful
Yeah.
self-contained work that, like, has been very slow to make it over here because there's a
Yeah.
lot more profit in something that you're going to have. Like, A, it has a chance to become a tremendous hit by the time it's been
Sure,
going
sure.
for 10 years. And B, that there's just literally enough of it that unless you have a very famous creator behind it, it'll be hard
Yeah.
to explain
Right.
and figure out how you're going to solicit and sell to the English speaking
and,
and
public.
and
that's-
piracy. And,
Yeah, and that sort of you were saying about like very famous creators, because I feel like most of Clamp stuff is like pretty well packaged.
Yeah.
It's not crazy long. And I think that it's true that like the only reason that we're able to get that kind of stuff is because it is this really famous creative team, and obviously they
Right.
had that Fox Kids card captor
Card
thing.
captor. And,
All right, so
while.
I'm going
bring
to
it.
break it down this
you got
way.
to.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is your favorite romance comic and author?
Oh,
Manga. Your favorite high school romance.
Oh, that's easy.
Wait, high school romance. Okay.
Like high school romance. I'm trying to break it down for anyone who's never read a manga, like myself. I'm not as interested in the high school stuff, but I do want to read
The
this
high school
stuff.
romances?
The high school romances. They do sound fascinating.
They're
It's just
fun.
not-
They
it
are.
doesn't speak to me initially.
Oh,
but
I know what mine is.
But for anyone in the audience who does want to read that stuff,
Oh, yeah.
I want to get recommendations for
Okay.
them. They've never read one. What is your favorite one to start with?
My favorite one is Ouran High School Host Club.
Oh, nice.
Okay, say that slower.
Ouran, Ouran, high school, so
High
high
school.
school host club.
Host Club.
Yes.
Okay. And who did that one?
Why can't I
remember.
remember the name of the
It's
author?
okay. It's okay. It's
But
okay.
anyway,
Caitlin
so
Glass is gonna kill me.
I know. I'm thinking that as well. Caitlin's probably
Somewhere she's
watching
going,
and she's throwing things. So Ouran High School Host Club. Part of me wonders, because I read this and watched this at a time that I already had seen a lot of anime, and I was very into just shoujo storytelling in general. Ouran High School Host Club is a parody of shoujo manga. So it makes fun of all of the tropes within like shoujo storytelling. But it's basically about this girl, Haruhi, who's very smart. And she goes to, again, there's a lot of stories about like the poor girls who goes to the rich high school. So like it's the poor girl who goes to the good school. And in the
So that story in and of itself is making fun of a popular trope in Japanese
Yeah, it's-
manga of
yeah.
the poor girl
But
going
like,
to the rich high school.
side note, so is Harry Potter. It
Right,
turns out
so-
he's one of the rich kids.
That's true.
No,
That's
like-
true. But
not
basically,
initially.
yeah.
That
So
was the anime
she,
right there.
so literally, like in the very beginning, she ends up breaking a vase, and she owes the host. So basically, at this school, there is this phenomenon
have to explain what a host club is.
host
Yeah.
club. So a host club basically is a bunch of rich, pretty boys. Again, you've
Very
got
pretty.
the Bishonen thing going on, and young women pay money to hang out with them, and just for them to. It's for rich girls who have too much
It's a
time on
thing.
their hands.
This is an analog to real world establishments.
This is yeah.
They really exist.
This is a real
mostly
thing.
called hostess clubs.
Yes.
But there's also host clubs.
Where,
Yes.
where essentially like they are like restaurant plus.
Yes. And the thing is there's nothing
Plus.
there's nothing overtly sexual about it. It literally is just like paying money to like have cake
With
The very pretty boy
with a
who's
very-
just gonna fawn.
Yeah, with a very pretty boy who's just gonna fawn over you.
In the real
feel like I
world,
should
there's
have
a
been born in
range
Japan.
of versions of this.
Yeah.
Like, there's a
Okay.
range of, like, overtness of sexuality, but there are, for sure, establishments where you're just like,
Jenny
I'm
came
paying
back
for
with
your
photos from
time
the
and
Owl
your attention.
Cafe,
Yeah.
where you get to like have cake with an owl
yeah.
who fawns over
Yeah.
you.
And so basically Haruhi, in order to repay her debt to the host club, cross dresses as a boy and becomes part of the host club.
Okay.
And they like, you know, various members of the host club fall in love with her because she's so like spunky and smart. That's also very common that, you know, the poor girl is like, she's real down to
So
earth.
she's
and
all
chill
she's
and-
all that, and she takes her glasses off and throws her hair out.
Yeah,
and
But
everyone's
in
like,
this
my
case, she
God.
like puts her hair
torn.
into a boy shape, and now she's sexy.
And
Yeah,
now she's
exactly.
sexy.
Now
Okay.
she's sexy because she's a boy, and like all of the girls are like in love with her. It's so unbelievably good.
Okay, so that's your suggestion.
Yes.
High school.
I'm
like,
torn. I've
romance,
got
like,
two. You go first
fun.
in case you get one of mine.
I don't
I'm
have one, by
torn.
the way. I'm asking on behalf of the audience.
I'm torn. There's
If you
two
have
that are
one.
killing me.
Okay.
Do you don't have to, because
I don't know that I have a good answer for fave high school romance.
I'm so torn.
I like. I don't know if they ever translated this.
Which
This is a sports story. It's
Ah.
about baseball.
I think
But
Touch- I
it
think Touch
has
got-
very touching relationships in it.
Yeah.
it might have gotten translated. I feel like it might have. It's been
Side
so
note,
long.
there's an enormous genre that's just sports stories.
Yeah,
Like,
sports is
Sports
big.
manga is
like,
huge.
Judo girl. There's just a
Judo
girl
girl.
who's great at judo.
Slam
Like,
dunk.
Oh yeah.
Basketball players. Initial D. Race car
Yep,
drivers.
race car drivers.
Yep. I'm gonna like my
Aim for the
favorite
best.
when you just started it as romance. Like Mason Koku's my go-to because
Right.
it's my like favorite love story.
I'm torn between Orange Road and Karekano.
Ah.
They're two very different vibes. Orange Road, which I think...
and when you say Orange Road, you're saying Orange Road.
Orange
That's
Road.
not like
Part
okay.
of the title.
Yeah.
the title, the full title
I just wanna make
is
sure.
Kimagure Orange Road. Kimagure is a very hard word to translate. It kind of it is a whimsical nostalgia for one's youth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's the story of a family of telekinetics. Oh yeah. A family of telekinetics whose the mom died, if I recall. The father's a
think
professional
so.
photographer, but they have to move around a lot because people discover that they're telekinetic and they have to move because they don't want to. They're it's very like Firestarter 1983. The world can never know. And the boy kind of meets two girls at the same date at his new school and kind of ends up kind of accidentally dating one of them, but also kind of starting to like fall very deeply in love with the other. And it's kind of this weird love triangle. And by the end of the series, we're not even talking about the telekinetic powers anymore. Like they've just vanished. And it's just
they're there, but that's not the story.
I don't think it even I don't even remember if it gets brought up anymore by the end of the manga. Like they just stop talking about it. And in the end, the manga is about him finally manning up and being like, I've got to stop dating this person that I'm with for the wrong reasons and actually like confess my feelings and have an adult relationship. And it is heartbreaking. It is painful, screaming, angry, real reactions. That's the and there's Madoka who's badass.
And this is Orange Road.
This is Orange Road.
Yeah.
Okay. What was your other one?
The other one was Karekano, which was by Gainax, the guys who did Evangelion.
Yes.
Stop.
Karekano.
Kare,
Kare?
Kare.
K-A-R-E.
K-A-R-E.
Yep.
K-A-N-O.
K-A-N-O.
The English translation is His and Her Circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a fun, hyperkinetic story about a girl who pretends to be awesome.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
She works really hard so at school everyone thinks that she's educated, refined, has great taste, is super pretty, is super smart, but really just goes home, puts on pajamas, listens to shitty J-pop, like awful rock.
It's kind of like it's a precursor in more of a high school romance setting to like Umaru-chan. I don't know if you read that or watched
I know
it
what
at all, but yeah.
And it's and she kind of ends up in competition with this guy who's the real deal. But whereas she's just sort of like really enjoys people praising her, she's like basically a praise sponge. So it's just she's awful and kind of rude and mean and at home and kind of just sad and like whatever. And then like kind of puts on a face for the day and goes out and just kind of pretends to be this awesome person. He's basically just in one of those families where it's like A-, you are grounded and you're getting a belt. And so he's just like, yeah, no, I do this because otherwise I am hurt. And is just all messed up. And they're conflicting at first, and then it kind of becomes this very complicated relationship. And like they like end up having sex and kind of how their whole friends group reacts to them now as like a sexual couple, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a really interesting
So
story.
it sounds like a lot of what these are like very in-depth character studies, like and different like situations and stuff like that, right?
With them
And it feels
because
real.
What most of us we're talking about last a long time.
Like, have you? It's one of those things. Like I always felt like I never saw any of my breakups exist in pop culture. Like I watched the CW, and that's never my breakup.
Yeah.
Even the bad, heavy, thick, crying, screaming, throwing dishes ones.
Yeah.
But
it feels
in
kind
manga,
of it feels kind of dramatized. I know what you mean on the CW, but yeah, in manga it can just be so
real and
real,
like devastating.
and even like the evolution of relationships within manga, like a lot of it is like people not communicating with one another and not in an over dramatic. Again, I don't mean to rag on the CW, but CW kind of way.
no, it's not operatic. It's very, which is odd because it has
and
so many
there's
operatic.
room for a lot of like melodrama and
there is a lot of
which is sort of
melodrama.
self-parody,
Yeah.
but like there's also this well-established tradition of other kinds of storytelling.
They do everything.
Yeah, we haven't like. There's so much we haven't even gotten
And that's why I'm like trying to boil this down. We talked about high school romance and like dramas and fun. There's magic. There's the magic
Magical
girl.
girls.
Okay, what is your favorite magical girl?
I mean,
manga?
Sailor Moon.
Sailor Moon. Okay,
Yeah.
forget Sailor Moon. What's your other favorite?
My other favorite is Shoujo Kakume Utena.
Okay, that's a lot of letters.
Translates to Revolutionary Girl.
Revolutionary girl.
Utena.
Okay.
It's a name.
Utena. Oh,
Her name
the name
is-
is
her
Utena.
name is Utena.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's so
Our buddy
good.
Jody Hauser has an Utena tattoo, by the way.
I do
Does she
too.
really?
Beautiful. Really?
Yeah, on my back. Yeah.
Such a good show.
Okay,
It's
so say the name again of the book.
Revolutionary Girl Utena.
Okay, but what's the if I wanted to go buy that book,
Right?
would I look for Revolutionary Girl Utena or would I? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
and Viz actually just released a beautiful
big,
box set
beautiful-
of the manga. Now, the thing that's really interesting about Utena is that the manga and the anime series are quite different from one another. I like them both. I like the anime series better.
Why are they different and how are they different?
So the manga is a lot more traditional storytelling than the anime is. The anime is very abstract.
Like what Twin Peaks? What's his name?
David Lynch.
Very David Lynch.
Very David Lynch.
Oh, okay. Now you have me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's so good. It's basically about a girl whose parents die when she is a child. And in her memory, and again, unreliable narrator, we're not sure if this is like really exactly what happened. In her memory, she was rescued by a prince when she was like sad about her parents' death. And he gave her a ring with a rose crest on it and said that they would meet again someday. And instead of her just being like, cool, I'm going to wait around and see what happens, she's like, I'm going to become that prince.
And so she grows up to be like the best prince.
Yeah,
she can
that's
be.
exactly what it is. Yeah, she
Very
grows up to
chivalrous.
be the best prince that she can possibly be. And
In case one day she takes over like a princedom,
Yeah,
or,
well,
like, she's like, I
That
just want to
shit's
be
cool.
this person.
it's more, that's how
shit's
it's like,
cool.
that shit's cool. I want to be a prince.
That's
Her
awesome.
model for how to
Yeah,
be a
for how to
person.
live her life
Okay.
is to be chivalrous and to take care of women.
So it's not WWJD, it's WW. What would the prince?
Yeah.
This prince
What
do?
would Charming do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a really, really interesting, like, character study and basically at this school that she goes to, the Otori Academy, she finds out that there's a bunch of people that have this rose crest ring that she has, and it's because they're all part of this like secret dueling circle where they duel for control of a person, the Rose Bride. And so in Utena's mind, she wants to put an end to this cycle and basically free the Rose Bride, who has no will or personality of her own and only matches that of the person that she's engaged to. It's so, oh my God, it's so good.
Amazing.
It's so good.
Okay, and that one is Revolutionary Girl
Utena. Yep.
Okay.
It's
Wow.
Yep.
You've definitely sold me on that.
They duel in a castle that floats upside down in the clouds.
Yeah.
Like it's completely 180
And
degrees.
it's like they duel to like choral rock music.
Coral like metal.
Yeah, like metal.
It's like Zeta
Yeah.
ume boku shirate. Oh, it's so good. Oh, I knew you know. I knew you know.
I
Oh.
don't have the soundtrack on what
No,
you're
I have
talking
it on
about.
like I have like 4 copies.
Okay, Taliesin, favorite magical girl comic.
Oh my god. Since I've already talked about Candy Candy's not a magical girl. Does Hana no Lunlun count? That's kind of old school. I mean, like, there's a bunch of them I really enjoy.
Yeah.
Saint Seiya, no.
It's magical boys.
Okay, favorite place where someone could start and it's a relatively
Okay.
accessible manga. That is
none
a
of
magical
nothing
girl
I'm
trope.
Nothing you
mentioning is accessible. Sailor Moon is such a good place.
It
to
is. It's a
start.
really good place to start.
Okay, so if we're talking Sailor Moon, is there a Sailor Moon Volume 1?
There is.
There is.
Yeah, okay.
Sailor Moon Volume 1 is
I'm
super
assuming that there is, but-
available.
Yeah.
I brought Volume 10 in English with me.
Yeah.
One thing that you have to also remember with manga, which will throw you if you're a comic book reader, is that if you go to what would traditionally be the
You'll be at
front,
the end.
there's a big sign that says, "Stop! You are going the wrong way." Manga is a very completely different type of reading experience. Start at the beginning and go to the end. And while you still read it in the same direction, the pages are flipped. And that's because this is how it would be read in Japanese. And by flipping the pages, which we did briefly
Yeah,
in the
this
West.
is when my brain shorted out last week.
Yeah,
but,
I'll show you. So, for a while in the West, they used to flip the pages. So this is the first volume of Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. And so this one, actually, you can see is in, like, you would read this from, left to right, as you would in the U.S.
would
Yeah.
Take the art and reverse it.
Yeah, so that you're actually looking at the art backwards here, which is a little bizarre.
Which does actually change the art.
It does,
very weird,
yeah.
but it does.
Yeah.
It irritated me when they first started flipping it. I was like, why aren't you just leaving it like a normal book?
Yeah.
And then I started seeing actual comparisons. I'm like,
you're
oh,
like,
that
oh, it's
really
different.
actually changes things.
Yeah.
So you get because the layouts were designed to work a certain way and the contents were designed a certain way. So an example of right to lefting on here would be this is a transformation
you got it?
sequence
All right.
from late into Sailor Moon. But you get essentially the sequential moments of Neptune crystal power. They're saying their catchphrases. Uranus crystal power. Pluto crystal power. Saturn crystal power. Flip the page. And now
Make
you're
it
going
up.
across the page, looking at each of them, make up, and then they say their catchphrases again in order. Like you do get used to it.
And look at
pretty
that!
close.
Look at that layout! Look at that
So
nuts!
good.
This is telling you that essentially, all these are kind of happening simultaneously, but you are flipping between them, watching it go.
And those
like,
angles, there's like a crystal refraction
Close up.
happening. Like
Yeah.
the light is just reflecting and breaking, and you're getting a sense of
it's
color
so
just because of the way
good.
that the lines are shifting.
And then you get the brand new
Boom! Oh,
Sailor Saturn, and you end with "Have arrived."
Yeah.
So this is a bunch of sort of later characters who come in that we haven't seen that much. I'll take Sailor Moon for anyone who hasn't. That's my entry point. It's about sort of ordinary junior high schoolers who learn that they have a cosmic destiny because they are the reincarnations of ancient protectors, and there's an elaborate mythology that they've sort of inherited.
I always say that they discover that they are the reincarnations of magical space princesses.
Yeah.
That's
It's
basically
true.
what it is.
That's basically
A
what it
long
is.
time ago, there was a kingdom on the moon, and they were like the inner circle of it. And spoilers for Sailor Moon.
things went very, very wrong.
You figure that out pretty quick.
But so they balance sort of the like everyday life challenges, like they're the side characters. There's one named Amy, so obviously I flipped my lid. I was in junior high. She liked science. She was the nerd, and I was like, in. I have recently chopped all my hair off, so she sort of needs to come out of her shell. And there's another one who's sort of like a deeply spiritual character who kind of has to build a relationship with these new friends because they're connected, but like they don't know each other in real life.
Yeah.
They don't know, like they don't have a foundation to start from. So you get the growth of their friendship as they're sort of dealing with these supernatural challenges over time. So you're balancing the like everyday story with the crazy fantastical elements.
Yeah.
How
in a
long
really
has Sailor
cool
Moon
way.
been going?
oh,
Is that like
The
60s or
first-
80s?
No,
No,
90s.
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 Oh,
Early,
90s.
early 90s.
92, I
Yeah.
think.
yeah,
90,
there you
92
go.
is when the anime started. I want to
Okay.
say the first volume of the manga the first chapter of the manga was actually published like late 91.
Yeah, 90-91.
Yeah, and it's actually it's a continuation. Continuation spin-off. So basically, Naoko Takeuchi, who created Sailor Moon, she created this one-shot manga called Codename Sailor V. So Codename Sailor V. And in it, she introduces a character who ultimately becomes Sailor Venus in Sailor Moon.
A side character, or like one of the main
one of the main
cast,
characters.
but not the center.
Not the
Not
title
Sailor
character.
Not the
Moon,
person
yeah.
you beat.
So basically, she made this manga codenamed Sailor V, and Toei was like, we want to,
publisher.
yeah, Toei, who's animation studio, was
okay.
basically like, we want to make an anime from your thing, and she was like, oh no, what do I do? And her editor was like, well, you have things like Super Sentai was already happening, and then we had stuff like Saint Seiya, which was a whole team of magical boys in that case. And so she's like, what if her editor was basically like, what if you make a team of magical girls, because then you have lots of people to tell stories about. And so she went, great. And so that's how Sailor Moon happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
And let me say that two important things is that the Japanese don't really have an issue with corporate culture. Corporate culture is not, that's not a problem. Like the notion like, hey, this little independent comic book you like just got picked up by Disney and they're doing 5 movies, 3 crossovers, a comic book, and you're like, awesome!
Yeah.
Like, there's never any like, oh, sold out. They're like,
No,
yay, sold out!
100%.
Yeah.
Definitely.
More.
And so they made the initial anime series in the 90s, and that took even more of a sort of Super Sentai form, where they did that kind of Monster of the Week thing.
Define Super Sentai.
Super Sentai is Power Rangers.
Yeah.
So again, it's like
A team of youths from different walks of light in tight-fitting, color-coordinated spandex, fighting monsters from different wakes of light in tight-fitting, color-coordinated spandex.
good, great.
I had that. We used to
amazing.
have a What is Sentai sheet.
I love that. But with Sailor Moon, it's like they all have little sailor uniforms that are different colors.
And that's a variation on the school uniform. It's not just like a weird thing. It's just that's a very common school uniform.
Yeah,
and
the,
so that's
the Sailor
like,
Fuku.
You used to get people being like, why are they all wearing those navy
No,
things?
it's
And
just a variation on the school uniform. And so basically, they made this anime series in the 90s. And again, this was during the time period wherein most anime series was being made more or less concurrently with the manga, and the manga wasn't happening as fast as the anime series, so they ended up with a lot of filler episodes. This is the version.
Can you just take a moment, because that's an amazing thing.
Yeah,
Like the idea that you're
let that
making it
absorb.
in both forms at the same time, and they don't know what's going to happen. So it's like if Game of
They have
Thrones,
to
like,
improvise.
they're just literally vamping for time while they wait for the next book to
Yeah,
finish.
exactly.
That's why they used to call Dragon Ball Z Dragon Ball Z, because they're like, there's only like 12
was
pages to
one of
make
the
a
biggest
24 minutes of like
Yeah.
show, and they're like,
That was one of the biggest reasons when I was like first a junior and like senior in high school, and I was discovering anime. I was like, oh, this is really fascinating. And I watched a few episodes of Dragon Ball Z, and I was like, they
going
just
really
yell at each
slow.
other where there's lines, and I
Yeah.
don't understand.
there's only
Yeah.
12 pages, they're
I don't
vamping.
understand what this is. Like, I gave it like 5 or 6 episodes and was like, anime is just, I will never get that, and I'm out. And now, like, I'm watching Cowboy Bebop, and
you
I'm
are.
like, give me more anime.
Yeah.
Like I'm discovering all
And
this
part of
stuff,
that was
but
also like the way that they were translated and presented. There were even certain things where like certain scenes wouldn't make the cut of the translation, so they would stretch the existing material even more.
Yeah.
So some of those problems got worse.
Yeah.
In translation.
Yeah, it is.
amazing.
It's
That's
really
fun.
interesting.
It's so fun to hear like the history of that, because I don't know that history.
Well,
so
and
this is-
so again, like, and Sailor Moon is
learning.
one of those things where like as far as the manga goes, there's I think 50 chapters or something like that. It's not that
It's
long.
not that many
Yeah.
books, actually.
Yeah.
It's only usually like 7 or 10 of the collected editions.
Yeah, of the
something
collected
like that.
editions.
I think there were 7 in the last way that they broke it down.
Yeah, because like even the 90s anime series I think is 200 episodes or something like that, which is not long when you look at something like a Dragon Ball, or
One
like
Piece will never
One
end.
Piece, which is literally never going to end
But
ever.
by the way, Ken
Shout
Ken's
out.
One Piece, where I
yeah,
completely
we
forgot to
have,
shout out our
Luffy.
wonderful
Ken
catch. Ken came in and gave us a One Piece piece
Yeah.
for a One Piece.
a One Piece.
Ken Wynn is amazing.
I know,
What a guy.
he did this in like a day. So he was like, I'm just gonna throw that together and had it up in like an hour.
Okay,
So basically it's like the manga exists as it is. It ended in like 95-ish
sounds
or
about
something like that. And they've never made more manga, but they have continued to create Sailor Moon content. As I mentioned, all the millions of musicals.
Sure.
Well, and Sailor Moon has had such a huge impact
It
on
has.
American pop culture.
Yeah.
Also, huge
I
impact.
always wondered sort of like, what was the relative scale of, like, it was a hit in Japan, but like
Huge.
I was always curious, like, is it like how much of a hit compared to how it was like foundational for a whole generation of fans over here?
I mean, it redefined the magical girl genre. I mean, we were talking earlier about how like Creamy Mommy never caught on, and like Sailor Moon caught on in a
Sailor
big
Moon.
way.
Yeah,
Because I
huge.
mean, you even think of it from the point of view of, okay, we have initially 5 and then eventually 9, 10 if you count Chibiusa. different characters who all have their own sets of accessories, and like it's a huge opportunity for merchandise.
Oh, I have friends. I've got friends who
Banana.
you like walk into their homes and it's just a museum of Sailor Moon merchandise, and you're like,
Yeah.
this is like Disney level disturbing. Like, you just spent $300 on a wand that has an LED in it, and
Yep.
I
Good
love
on
it.
you.
And I love
no,
it.
I
Good
love
on
it.
you. Yeah.
I'm so there, but like, wow.
Okay, so what? So there's also horror manga.
Oh yeah.
God.
What
so much.
other?
We early shouted
Types
out
of-
Uzumaki is a very famous one by Junji Ito. That was one of our picks on our horror episode.
Yeah.
I'm just
I didn't
left
bring
field.
enough
Like
horror
there's
manga.
action and science fiction stories, very
Yeah.
famous ones,
Like Akira.
which was hugely influential in both worlds because it was made into a much beloved movie,
Yeah.
which a lot of people are like, I know exactly what it was. Like Edgar Wright tweeted out like his stub from like the theater where he saw Akira in the late 80s.
that's
Landmark
amazing.
Theater, West Side Pavilion.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was
Carl
like a
Macek
huge
and
deal,
Fred
like
Perry in tow.
because storytelling was so different. Like, so you brought Nausicaa.
Yes, I did.
Changed my life.
Nausicaa is
That you may have heard
And
of.
what genre is this?
I would say dystopian fantasy.
dystopian fantasy.
Dystopian
Okay.
fantasy, which is again very common.
Sure.
So Nausicaa basically is about a post-apocalyptic Earth, and the world is basically toxic. You can't go outside without like a gas mask. And Nausicaa is the princess of this very small kingdom. And she's like ultra in tune with nature, essentially. And so like she goes out there, and normally people are like killing and harvesting these like giant insects to use their shells to create like technology and stuff. But Nausicaa kind
Where
of
did the
like
giant insects come? Like, is that like the post-apocalyptic?
We don't.
We don't know.
It-
Yeah.
They get into
Oh,
it,
okay,
but
okay.
like,
but that's a story point where we just sort of like Attack on Titan. It's like, where
They're,
did the Titans
they're,
come
A little
from?
bit.
it's
Okay.
more like
Yeah.
Dune. It's like the worms in Dune.
Yeah,
You're like,
yeah.
what are these things? They're huge and they're weird and they're
Gotcha.
violent.
Gotcha.
And so but again, like she kind of starts to like bond with these creatures a little bit and understand that like they are living things with feelings. And you kind of come to realize that like human beings are the ones who are responsible for this terrible mess through like the overuse of technology.
And the bugs and the poisonous toxic plants are like all there for a reason.
Yeah.
And like this is a good thing, and they're like interrupting the attempt for the Earth to like restabilize
to like
itself.
restabilize. Yeah, exactly.
And it's very Game of Thrones feel.
It's very Game of Thrones feel. There's lots of sort of not exactly warring kingdoms, but
Greed,
But
I
yeah,
mean.
there's a lot of greed and corruption. And there is a film that covers the first 16 chapters of the manga thereabouts. And again, like it's by Hayao Miyazaki, who's an incredibly
a very young Miyazaki.
very, very young Miyazaki. I mean, this was before like Studio Ghibli even existed. Actually, Nausicaa is very much credited with the reason that studio came into existence. Because Nausicaa, the film itself, is not Ghibli not Ghibli.
Miyazaki is
pre-Ghibli.
a name you probably all know because he would go on to found the studio
Sure.
and create a lot of the most
Right, like Princess
famous
Mononoke,
exploding-
And
Spirited Away.
I'll even say he
and-
talks about Mononoke is very much a conversation with Nausicaa.
you could make an argument that like
This is an
They-
old man's
these-
look at Nausicaa.
Yes, 100%. But yeah, so basically, but for most of his stuff, like it has other source material. So like Ponyo is a sort of variation on The Little Mermaid. Howl's Moving Castle is based on an English novel, actually. But Nausicaa is his own original story, and it is based on this manga, and the manga just goes even like further into sort of the state of the world, and the decision that Nausicaa makes at the end is it's so good. I cannot recommend it enough. And again, it's only this is it.
That's
4
it.
volumes. That's it.
That's it.
So
This is
it's
great.
really easy to just read independently as a story. If you like Hayao Miyazaki stuff at all, you will love this. If you like the film Nausicaa, you will like the manga even better.
So there's so much territory that we haven't traveled. Like there's tons of horror stories.
Yeah.
But manga does some of the best storytelling in the world on the subjects of artificial intelligence and
Ugh.
like dangers of technology.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
They literally write the book on most of that
Well,
stuff.
I mean, and one of the first manga series, and if you were watching the Facebook Live thing before that, I can remember reading because they serialized it in Animerica, which was like a magazine that was like, here's your anime
Oh,
fix.
boy.
Like literally, I would go through Animerica. That's how I discovered Utena. I was like I was like, there's an ad for this thing, Utena. Kuniiku Ikuhara, who worked on Sailor Moon, got it. Gotta find it. So as soon as I found it in the video store, I was like, yep, this I'm getting. But they serialized manga that was being published by Viz at the time, because it was a Viz publication. So one of the first things I ever read was Galaxy Express 39.
Galaxy Express, I was just about to... Oh, God.
Which is
Just
like
about to hit that.
sci-fi, but the whole thing is about like the ultimate goal of everybody in life is to become is basically to get a mechanized body and therefore essentially achieve immortality.
But you got to afford it.
But you got to be able to afford it.
So only rich people become immortal, and like once you're there, like that, like the beginning where like there's the hunting club of all the cyborgs.
Yeah.
And like the guy's mom literally gets hunted down, and her head gets mounted on a plaque in their game room.
Yep.
Like because
Yeah,
they were
the protagonist's mom gets
yeah,
brutally murdered.
and like literally stuffed and mounted on the wall.
Is the brutal murder of the protagonist's mom like is that a trope in?
No, well, no, it's not a trope.
Not really. Not to say it doesn't happen, but
But it's not like a common like, oh, here.
No, there's
But
no.
we're not talking about we're talking about a wide range of genres, not all of which were intended for consumption by children.
It's not like American
you're gonna
comic
run
books
into
where
a lot.
everything is fitting in one. It's like saying, is there a movie trope in American film about
Yeah.
mothers missing?
Yeah.
And you're like, in American movies,
just all of American.
like what's
Sure.
a trope in American film? You see what I mean? Where you're like,
exactly.
English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They literally cover. There are popular mangas just about salarymen working
is
like
ordinary
clerks,
businessmen.
basically.
Yep.
Except not funny, just about working at a desk. Mm-hmm. And
But what's the story there? I don't under.
Well, because
Like,
again,
that
Think of interesting
you're
indie
thinking
films.
about conflict
Like,
resolution.
you
It's
can
just get to know everybody.
But again, there's like
So this is like the independent film version of a comic book. Is like.
Except it's a hugely popular
Yeah.
hit. It's not even like an indie book. It's very popular because
it's
salarymen
more
love reading
okay.
it.
So it not a comedy, but it's almost more like the reason we watch shows like Parks and Recreation or like The Office is because they're
Freaks and
about
Geeks.
Freaks and Geeks.
Sure.
They're like about normal people.
So there's the fun, interesting takes on that, and then you've got your like American Beauties. You're sort of like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
look at ordinary life, but I'm gonna say something about it or investigate
Gotcha.
it from a
Okay.
different angle.
Like
Yeah.
you
There's a
can
million
like
kinds of
you
stories
confuse
can
me
tell.
because like I'm expecting that anything is possible. Like everyone wants to read every single possible story.
No.
So in my mind, when you said it's about a clerk, I'm like, so it's just about this dude having to go find barcodes. Like I'm so confused.
because again, it's like
but
I was like,
but-
I don't understand what that story
He's
is.
going out drinking with his friends.
Yeah.
Okay, but see, like that makes more sense
Yeah.
to me.
Like Beck is a
so-
perfect example. I've got it here.
Yeah.
Beck is and I've mentioned already. It's a book about a Japanese kid he's fun, he's enthusiastic, he's a little listless.
Yeah.
And he discovers American rock music and decides to learn how to play the guitar. And so the first chunk of this book is him just learning how to play the guitar and kind of sucking at it. And eventually he gets into a band with his friends and they start a band. And they do okay. I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's not like he's going to become a rock star.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the end of, like, one of the first, like the fourth big arc is that they play a like, stage C at a music festival outside of Tokyo. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, that's the big... is just getting them on stage to play, and they're good, and he's a great singer.
And again, and this is just kind of circling back to what we were talking about at the very top of the show, that like, and it was like you were saying, Taliesin, like, what's a trope in American films?
Mm-hmm.
This is all of American film. This is all of American television. This is all of Western, just straight up novels.
Michael Bay and David Lynch.
Yeah, it's
Like,
all of it.
Those are both.
Yeah.
And there are some tropes. I mean, like, there are some storytelling
Sure.
mechanisms that are basically almost holdovers from early manga or the operatic storytelling that this borrows from
Yeah.
ukiyo-e and bunraku puppets, and like little things like people get a little squishy sometimes when they want to kind of parody themselves.
Yeah.
It's called super deformed.
Do we have time for you to briefly say what ukiyo-e on Boonrocker are?
Okay, so ukiyo-e, oh my god, ukiyo-e, oh god, where to even start? It started in the 17th century, and it was basically a form of art. It was a kind of pop art of the 17th century, whereas there were the formal painters, there were people who were basically doing street art, and it was art of brothels and people in the street and marketers, and it was middle class life, because this was when the middle class was starting in Japan, very much why we had the Renaissance. They had the Edo period.
But we're talking about illustrations.
And
As
it was
popular
illustrating pop art illustrations of middle class life, which was fascinating, sometimes scandalous. And then bunraku was a very, very popular form of entertainment, which was puppetry. Puppetry was huge. And when we think of like cute puppetry, bunraku storytelling was really intricate. And it was all ages, but they would actually, some of like the most interesting martial arts tropes of like the way that they fly through the air with the jumping kicks were things that they perfected with these puppets.
Yeah.
Of like the amazing flying and martial arts techniques.
How to
a
present
lot of this
battle stories and
started
martial
in this
techniques.
puppetry
Yeah.
form of the bunraku puppet. And you can, it's really fascinating.
Ukiyo-e translates to pictures of a floating world, and it sort of became
That's
famous
a really
as
good
for.
translation of it, yeah.
I think that's the.
That's
like,
it's all soft, but you're dead on. Yeah, that's great.
but it sort of just refers to this this particular era and this like form of illustrated storytelling. But it's like again with scrolls and woodcuts, there's an elaborate history of like intermixing pictures and narrative that was sort of drawn on for this era of like the century that would come of mass market publication drew on all of this rich cultural history.
And it's because they had that history that it was so easy for the population to adopt manga as a form of national pop culture. It was cheap, it was easy, it could be made in the country, distributed quickly. I mean, even before that, even in the 17th century with ukiyo-e, it was so easy to move a picture up and down the entire country as a way of communicating and having unofficial communications and talking about life across the country, that it was just easier. And it was very hard to read. Japanese has 3.5 alphabets. It's hard to read. And you don't actually need to know all three to read. Like most people can't actually read a newspaper in Japan.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But you don't need to.
Yeah.
A lot of kanji is mostly there for like legal issues. I mean,
I feel
like
like our language teachers were holding out on us. They were like, no, definitely everyone has a working, like you get, because there aren't a standard, like you're supposed to have mastered a certain set before you graduate high school.
Right.
But this is just me throwing
but becoming literate in Japanese is getting your hiragana
It's a
and your
lifelong
katakana
process
down,
as
and
well,
then
like-
the kanji that you need.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to learn them all unless you're going to become a lawyer.
So there's a set of phonetic ways to write the language,
Yes.
and then there's a set of characters borrowed from Chinese that you can spend the rest of your life learning, but there's sort of a basic set of them that like are considered kind of this is your literacy.
is what
Anything
you
other
really
than this
need.
you can look up.
And
Like-
due to their construction, you can usually infer. Once you're literate, you can infer the same way that we can infer an understanding of a word we don't know from its context in a sentence.
Sure.
They can infer meaning from a kanji based off its construction, because often the more complex ones are built of other kanji symbols. Oh my god.
Sometimes more direct, sometimes less direct. But
Okay, so I love like horror comics and stuff like that. What is a good horror manga for me to start with?
Has anyone translated Gege no Kitaro?
I don't know.
Maybe not.
it's finally coming into translation, I think. There's a ton of very famous Japanese works by Shigeru Mizuki, who did like a ton of like folklore stuff.
Yeah.
That's sort of only just making its way. Like even though it's like massively famous and well known in Japan, it hasn't been like I think Fetagraphics are the people doing it now. I brought one of his
bless
like
you.
serious historical ones. He did an autobiography. But he's also known for these folklore stories.
They're so
But I think they're finally making their way to English. So it's a lot of like ghost stories essentially.
Yeah.
Parasite's a lot of body horror.
Yeah, Parasite's a
got
lot of body horror. There's good like psychological thrillers.
Well, you're reading
also.
Monster, which is one of the best psychological
Yeah, no, I love
thrillers.
I read that this morning. It was
And it's just going to get weirder and darker.
yeah, like I got through the whole first book. I was like, oh, this poor doctor. Oh, what is going on? This poor
Yeah.
man.
No, it's like a world. It's like the BBC Sherlock world where there's no Sherlock, just Moriarty, and just this is like that's the world you're in right now. Is like the world without Sherlock, where Moriarty's just having a ball.
Yeah, like I'm excited to have a manga that I'm like, yeah.
Wait, so
like
tell us about Monster.
Yeah.
I've only read the first book, so I don't know anything about it. But it starts off with this doctor, and he's trying very hard to like become like the chief neurological surgeon, I believe. And his future father-in-law is the head of the whole hospital, and he's like, I see good things for you. This is all in Germany. He's like, I see good things for you, as long as you continue to do this, like, do my bidding, basically.
Yeah.
He lets a person die in order to save an opera star, and he feels guilty about it, and he does that because the director of the hospital told him to. And so when these 2 kids are brought in, and one of the kids has a gunshot wound, and he's like, I can save this kid. Well, the mayor also has like a stroke, and he's brought in after the kid gets there, and his future father-in-law is like, take care of the mayor. And he's like, well, that's the wrong decision to make. Like, other people can take care of the mayor. I'm going to go take care of the kids. Screw you. And that ends up getting him on the outs with his father-in-law. He's busted down to just like a low-level ER doctor. He's never going to advance. And you're just like reading this book. You're just like, screw this guy so hard. He's a good doctor. Screw this guy.
Yeah.
But then the kid that he saved ends up not being great. And he kind of he overhears this nice doctor saying, I just wish that they should all die. They just like, he's drunk. He's like, they should just all die. And the kid is like, all right. And like goes and kills those 3 doctors who are like holding him back. So, and then it jumps ahead like 9 to 10 years later, and there's a new string of murders happening in town, and no one knows what's going on. And this investigator is like thinks that the doctor is kind of connected to it somehow. And that's where, like, I don't want to say anything else, but that's where it ended.
So
good. And I was just like, oh, I've got to go read all of this.
It's very Hitchcock.
Yeah.
And may I also say, I got it at the Pasadena Public Library.
Hey.
Taliesin recommended it, and I was
That's
like, I'm going to go to the library.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as, like, it's not as intense as that because obviously there is a lot of supernatural elements involved in it as well. But, you know, a manga and anime series that's often recommended as a good starter that is kind of a psychological thriller is Death Note. Which is obviously getting a lot of attention right now because of that Netflix thing, no comment. But Death Note is great. It's
a lot of fun.
The third act is weak, but it's not so weak that
ain't it the truth always.
It's not so weak that it ruins it though.
Yeah.
And
so when you say third act, forgive me, because earlier we had mentioned that
Right.
like, Japanese
Exactly. The third act is
literature-
always weak.
yeah, I mean
Well,
it's not.
but
the-
Japanese culture doesn't
It's
follow
not.
an act structure.
Well, again, it's
correct?
not a clear cut third act either.
Yeah.
But it's just like the third quadrant, let's say. But quadrant is
Sure,
4, so
sure.
the third whatever
We're,
3
we're,
is.
we're so psychologically trained to expect things to happen in
Yeah,
Act 3
yeah.
that when we hit Act 3 and we're like, oh wait, this is like a 5 to 7 act structure, and you're like, but okay, we're still going apparently.
Yep.
It
Basically,
feels
That
weird.
portion.
yeah,
Yes, okay.
the last portion of the story. So basically, something really major happens 3/4 of the way through the story, and you're like, this is where it's gonna end. It's not over. It's not okay.
So is it more like Lord of the Rings, where you're like, and it's done. Oh, we're going back to the Shire, and it's done. Oh, now
No.
we're
No, it's more like, oh, it's about to heat up, and it's
just happening.
oh no, we're still walking. Okay.
Just horrible stuff is happening to your family now. I don't know.
Oh.
What's the premise
now
of
we're-
Death Note?
Death Note, great series. Basically, and this is very common in Japanese storytelling as well, is the idea of these death gods, the Shinigami. And so in Death Note, a Shinigami, the way that they kill people is they literally write the names of people who are supposed to die in their death notes. It's literally a notebook where you write the circumstances of someone's death and then they die. A Shinigami named Ryuk gets bored because they just sit around watching people all the time and waiting for the time for them to write their name and kill them. So he gets bored and he drops his death note to the earth. And it is discovered by a young man in high school at the time, though he's an adult by the end of the series.
Straight up just due to boredom. Oh my god, that's...
Yep.
I'm so on board just for that.
Named,
Like, I love the idea of a bored demigod just like...
That's exactly
Mic
what
drop.
it is. So it is discovered by a young man named Light Yagami, who he's very smart. He's very good looking. He everybody loves him, and he's the son of the chief of police, and he is a outstanding citizen who develops a god complex upon obtaining this notebook, because he basically starts off by just killing people who are in prison. He basically, to figure out if he reads the rules of the Death Note, and he's like, this isn't gonna work.
There's no way.
So basically, a crime is in the process of happening, and they say the name of the criminal on TV, and he sees the criminal's face, so he has a clear picture of them, because you have to know their real name and
See them.
be able to picture
Yeah.
their face. And in it, it's if the person whose name is written in this notebook will die of a heart attack in 40 seconds unless other circumstances of their death are, specified. So he just writes the name in to be like, whatever, I'm going to see if this works. And it turns out it does.
So he dies of a heart attack.
Yes. So then he starts killing criminals. And again, it comes from this idea of like, well, I'm going to make the world a better place because I'm going to end crime by killing everyone who commits crimes. But then people start to figure out that this is going on and all these criminals are mysteriously dying. So he starts to kill anybody who might find out what he's doing. It's so great.
So when he decides that like it's time for someone to die, does the board demigod, what was his name? Ryuk. Does the board demigod get to kill them? Is that part of it?
He's just like, cool, you just do you, man.
You do you, bro. You
Yep.
do you.
Yep, just keep feeding me apples.
So how do like how
So
He
the
makes
main-
it kind of
who is
it's
the
the order of things.
Yeah.
Like, he writes it in the book, and that's the way that normally if you were gonna have a heart attack, the idea is that dude would have written your name, dies of a heart attack. This is how it clipping the threads of life in the three.
But
phases.
it's not like death is coming down and going like, oh shit, he's got this thing in the book. I've got to kill him with a car. You just write he's run over by a car and then a car runs over him. So
they're not
in
big
some
on
ways-
personifications of death.
They're not into
not a
that.
big
he's
thing.
just like writing fabrics of reality into existence.
Yes.
Oh god.
Yep. Now, the interesting part of the story comes
Yeah, because it's been very uninteresting so far. Thank you for finally making this interesting.
When the basically like Japanese police department starts an investigation into these murders, and they bring in this genius detective who only goes by the name of L. And it's all about like, and on top of that, again, Light is the chief of police's son. So he also gets involved in the investigation of himself. So it's all about these like mind games that L and Light play with each other to try to figure out
And he can't kill
one
L.
another. And he can't kill L because he doesn't know his
Doesn't know his
name.
name. Oh, that's awesome.
We gotta start wrapping it up. I know. I want to finish this up by just saying that I contacted a friend at Viz who was so nice because one of the big problems with manga is that because so little of it has been translated, it's really, really hard to find legal ways of like reading a lot of this stuff. So if you go to viz.com, there's free sample chapters at viz.com, and you can get a couple tastes there. Also, they do a thing which is they have a subscription to Weekly Shonen Jump in English that comes out the same day as Japan, and it's less than $26 a year.
That's insane.
For your Shonen Jump, for your weekly Shonen Jump picks. There's also an overdriveservice.com, and libraries are a huge, huge fan. And if you're a fan, if you want a shonen action book right now that's popular, One Punch Man.
Oh God, One Punch Man is great.
People
Death
are
Note
freaking out over
and
One Punch Man.
Death
So
Note
good.
and Utena are big. Black Clover and Maji for fantasy. Kami-sama Kiss for also.
I love Kami-sama Kiss.
For another shoujo book. And the other big one is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is another good place where people call upon
This is one people have been following for years that's sort of finally getting proper translation
Yeah.
and release, and people so I haven't read it yet, but I'm very excited.
JoJo's
Gamer Blue X was hoping that we would talk about
JoJo's
that.
Bizarre Adventure,
yeah.
that people like summon avatars to fight for them, and it's really cool. There's a very gritty Gundam right now called Gundam Thunderbolt. There's a lot of good manga to read, and I know I just also on the shoujo end of Spectrum, Anonymous Noise, which is apparently I haven't read yet, but I've heard. This is a friend over at Viz who sent me like a good beginner's reading list, so. I'm going to make sure that all these end up. We do a little post. This beautiful
perfect.
people compile everything we say.
Thank you. Also, if you have a Crunchyroll subscription, you can use the Crunchyroll manga app as well, where they have a ton of manga. And even if you don't have a Crunchyroll subscription, like they also have like sample chapters that you can read. But again, like a Crunchyroll subscription is $6.95 a month, and you get anime, so much anime with no commercials and a ton of manga. Like, it's incredible.
It's a bargain.
What a time to be alive, because this was not the norm in my childhood.
Starting over with Amy, let's call ourselves out. And
my name is Amy Dallen. Thank you so much for watching Wednesday Club. And do we have time for that piece of art?
We're gonna
We'll close with it.
We'll close if we can. If you can find that piece of art, I didn't put it in the Dropbox, but if you've got it, we'll put it up at the very end. It'll be very cool. So.
My name is Matt Key. Thank you for being patient with me while I was confused.
Thank you. No, you don't have to be
Thank you.
Where can we find you online?
I'm on Twitter at the Matt Key. I go on to Screen Junkies a couple times a week, and I have a Marvel show on Tuesdays with Popcorn Talk.
You keep showing up on Signal Boost too. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's almost like I'm involved with that show or something.
Weird.
I'm Emma Fyffe. I can be found all over the internet at my name, EMMAFYFFE. I will actually be on Screen Junkies News tomorrow, and then
Really?
yeah, are you doing it tomorrow?
Yeah.
Yay! Awesome!
Yeah.
Synergy.
Yeah, so I'll be on Screen Junkies News tomorrow. You can also catch me on a lot of stuff over at Collider. We are doing a trial run of doing TV Talk daily next week. I will be on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. We'll be streaming live at 8 o'clock a.m. Pacific time, 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if that does well, then we will probably go daily or at least more than once a week for the foreseeable future. So be sure to check that out because it's going to be awesome and fun. And it's the first time we've ever streamed it live. So that'll be a blast as well. Also, you can catch me doing the post-game interviews for the Movie Trivia Schmodown over at Collider as well, which is a blast. And on Friday nights over at Hyper RPG, I am part of a Star Wars show called Pencils and Parsecs. We play the Edge of the Empire role-playing system from Fantasy Flight. It is so much fun.
Yeah,
I am.
100% so much fun.
I am. Yeah, Amy's been on before. It's just, literally every guest star we have is like, please don't kill me. I want to come back someday. So we stream live at 9 o'clock p.m. Pacific time on Friday nights. That's twitch.tv/hyperrpg.
And do you still do your Sailor Moon podcast?
I do, yeah. Oh my God,
cool.
duh. And I have a Sailor Moon podcast. Hello. I have a Sailor Moon podcast. It's called Love and Justice. If you look for Sailor Moon in the iTunes section of the podcast store on the podcast section of the iTunes store, we're like the second thing that comes up. And yeah, we're Love and Justice. We're lnjpod.com. That's our website.
And I'm Taliesin Jaffe. You can find me at Executive Goth anywhere that it matters. You can see me on Critical Role every week and a whole bunch of other stuff. And thank you for watching. And again, remember that there's no better way to learn a lot about yourself and where you come from than seeing the media and art from people from different cultures. We share so much in common, but there's also so much that you've just not seen about the human condition. There's no better way to learn about it. Thank you very much, and read more comics.
Yay!
Yay!